Hey, everybody stay close to me. Rory, Malcolm, stay close to me. Just don't go anywhere, because they have no idea what the Bronx is. They have no idea. And they're dressed like clowns. I mean, literally. So I'm like, come, the pirate clowns. So I'm just stay close to me, stay close to me. And we get closer and closer. And then we get to where the buildings part. And there in front of us is a sea of about 1,000 middle school, mostly boys, some girls, Black and Puerto Rican, some white kids. There's a lot of white kids that lived up in Bronx River, a lot of poor white people that live up there. And they're wilding out to the music. They're dancing. People are yelling out of the windows, turn that music off, and throwing bottles down, glasses breaking. A fight breaks out. You know how middle school kids are. Fight breaks out, and all of them go run like lemmings to see that fight. Then another fight breaks out, and they all run to see that fight. And I'm looking over in the corner of my eye, Malcolm McLaren, and he and Rory are just like, oh shit, where are we? And I'm like, yeah, you think you're so bad? You think you're so bad? You're in the boogie down, baby. Now it was like the inner circle of Dante's Inferno. It was madness. I said, just come with me, come with me. We got to get it behind the rope where Bambaataa turn system is set up. And they're like, man, we got to get out of here. We got to we're now been spotted. We can't leave. There's no going away.
Yeah,
everybody's seen us now.
Yeah,
we'll be like done. So now we're behind the ropes and we're behind turntables. I introduced Malcolm McLaren to Bambaataa and Jazzy J, and I said, Bam, man, get Jazzy on the turntables. You know, just playing records ain't gonna make it. We're gonna lose them. And he goes, okay, we'll put Jazzy on the next record. So he finishes that record, and Jazzy gets on the turntables. He starts scratching. What we now know is turntablism. It's like we call. I said, see, Malcolm, see what he's doing? That's special mix DJing. See the kid over there? That's breakdancing. See it over there? That's like graffiti. And see what Ike C on the mic is doing? That's like rapping. This is the thing I was telling you about back in Manhattan. And he goes, okay, this is cool. He said, let's get out of here, but I got an idea.
The show starts in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Flash Talks. This is history worth listening to. I go by the name of Flashback, and on today's show, we have a legendary figure in the hip-hop culture. Man, this is one of the pioneers of hip-hop. This man took hip-hop to the next level back in the days. That's right, in the 80s. And I'm so honored to have him on the show. He goes by the name of Michael Holman. He's a filmmaker, journalist, impresario, and so much more. He co-created graffiti art events that launched the careers of John-Michel Basquiat, Fab Five Freddy, and Lee Quinones. He was the first hip-hop journalist. You hear that right? The first hip-hop journalist to introduce Malcolm McLaren to the hip-hop world, leading its global expansion. Michael established the first hip-hop nightclub in downtown New York, produced the first nationally syndicated hip-hop TV show called Graffiti Rock. I don't know if you guys remember that, but that was a dope show. And created the first b-boy dance crew called the New York City Breakers, or NYCB. His archives are now held by the New York Public Library and Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. Michael also produced and directed the first b-boy breaking film called Catch a Beat and introduced Malcolm McLaren to the hip-hop world, leading to the introduction to hip-hop all over the world and Europe. Michael established the first hip-hop nightclub called Negril. That's right, downtown New York, where he had DJs like Africa Bambaataa, Grand Wizard Theater, DJ Kool Herc, and the Rocksteady crew, and so many, many, many other artists. Michael also helped produce the film Beat Street. I don't know if you knew that, but he wrote a book also called Breaking, published in 1984. So let's dive into Michael's history and learn about his beginnings, his accomplishment, and all that good stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Michael Holman. What's going on?
Yo, what's up, man? Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Flash.
Thank you, man. So, what do you think of the intro? Everything's going on. What do you see on the screen? I usually start asking that to all the guests, just so they could break down a little bit of the hip hop culture. So, break it down, my brother.
I dig it. I mean, it's real colorful. I like the graphics. Kind of fits with where you are, where I am. I've got my studio behind me here with my art, where I create music, and all kinds of good stuff. So yeah, I'm digging it. I'm digging the whole vibe, man.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm so honored to have you on this show. And one of the reasons why I do this show is to give you my flowers now. You're still with us right now. I'm not that type of person that start honoring after. I'd rather do it right now. You're with us here. And I want to make sure I give you my flowers. And I appreciate everything you've done for the culture from the beginning. I've been hearing your name since I started. And I started early 90s. But it's an honor to have you on the show. And I want to dig into like your past, how you started all this. So we're going to start it off from the top. How were you introduced to the hip hop culture? And when I say the hip hop culture, I know when you were there it wasn't even called hip hop culture.
That's right.
So I want you to just talk about let's take Michael 10 years old. I want you to go back to you at 10 years old and just tell me your beginnings. Like, I want you to unpack that and just let the world know like your beginnings. So talk to me.
That's an interesting choice, 10 years old, because I grew up an Army brat, meaning my father was an Army officer. So we lived all over the world in some ways, not everywhere in the world, but all over Europe and the United States. And I had this incredible opportunity, this incredible luxury growing up in and amongst a lot of different cultures and different people and different nationalities and getting to see the world at a very young age. But when you mention 10 years old, it's interesting because that's right around the time my family were living in Germany in Grafenwehr and Kaiserslautern, American Army bases in Europe and Germany. And a movie comes out. It's one of these films, Beach Blanket Bingo could have been one of these films that came out of LA that would all these Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello and all these Disney kids that grew up sort of like what happened with Justin Timberlake and a lot of other people who grew up through the Disney system. That paradigm actually started in the late 50s, early 60s with artists like Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello. And they had these movies that would come out. That was a lot of surfing, and it was very Southern California, and it was grabbing that American Southern California pop youth culture vibe. And again, I'm around 10 years old. The film is showing in Germany. We're in Germany in an American Army base, just kind of like real thirsty for American culture. Wow, we're from the States. I want to go back to the States. Didn't realize what an advantage we had at the time living overseas. But a film came out, and I think it was called Beach Blanket Bingo or something like that. And it was the first appearance in a feature film of James Brown. And it's taking place in a ski lodge up in the mountains somewhere. And all these kids, instead of surfing, they're skiing. And James Brown and some of the Fabulous Flames backup singers show up with these winter Christmas sweaters that you typically wear that time of year. And he comes out and he does Cold Sweat and some other, he either did Cold Sweat or Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. And I remember feeling transformed. I felt like, wait a second, here I was, this young Black kid with a father who's a military Army officer, living in a mostly kind of white world in Europe at the time. And most films are about white people, made by white people, starring white people. And all of a sudden, here's this film with a bunch of white teenagers, and James Brown comes on.
Wow.
And he does his thing. He's dancing. He does the splits. He's spinning, styling. And I remember that my life had transformed. It was like there was my life before I knew about James Brown, and then there was my life after I knew about James Brown. And I became obsessed by him. There was something in that music. And this is like James Brown in like 66, 65, 66, right around when I'm 10.
Oh, wow.
And the music isn't as slamming and as hard and as dope as it would become about 8 to 10 years later when he's doing Good Foot and Give It Up or Turn It Loose Live, or I don't want nobody to give me nothing, open up the door, I'll get it myself. All these like incredible tracks that he did late 60s, early 70s. It wasn't that funky yet. It was more soulful, but it was transformative to me. It really ignited something in me in terms of identity, in terms of movement and dance. It would set the stage for me as a young 10-year-old for the time that we'd be in California some 7 or 8 years later. My father has already been 18 months in Vietnam. He's already back from Vietnam. We're down in living in Los Angeles, and it's high school, and I'm going to Narbonne High School in Torrance, California, moving all over again. And that's when James Brown, for me, was just the voice, the style, the sound, the beats in my life that I so needed, that so much ignited and illuminated and freed within me this energy that still lives with me to this day. And the way that happened, the way that voice in me was awakened by James Brown, first in 1966 in Germany, seeing that film when he's at the ski lodge doing, Cold Sweat. And then again, like 7 years later, and it's like 1981, 82, and I'm in high school, and I'm starting, and this is California, and you have to understand, California, Southern California, even Northern California is, for those of you who are from New York and from the East Coast, and you think you've got it all down, locked down, let me tell you, LA and California in general is a mad dance craze place. I mean, it is like kids know how to move. I mean, look at Soul Train, right? I mean, that proves to you that kids know how to move. So I'm living in Southern California. It's 1972. James Brown is God. And this is a time you have to understand when, for James Brown, he would come out with a hit song 4 times or more a year. And each one of those songs would have a dance that would go to it, like the Good Foot, or there would be another dance coming out by somebody else that would go with a James Brown song. But he came out with a really slamming track every quarter, and it was like clockwork. And it was a time for me in which my freestyle soul, my freestyle body came out. And it was high school, like I said, in Narbonne High School in Southern California, in Torrance, outside of LA. It would be Fridays during lunchtime. I don't know who organized this, but in the gym, we would set up, like, during lunch, somebody would get a turntable from the AV department, and we would just play records for half an hour while instead of eating lunch, we would just play records. And we'd be doing the Rock Steady to Aretha Franklin's track, or we would dance to like the latest James Brown songs, or all the latest hits, all the funk and soul hits, and go back to class just sweating. We had a little disco for half an hour. And then but actually before that, I was at a high school in San Francisco. That shows how much I was moving around, called Lowell High School. And I was part of a Northern California vibe, Northern California soul vibe. And I have to tell you that as much as hip hop is a creation of New York and the Bronx and the Northeast in the United States, you have to understand, since James Brown, since James Brown is really truly the father of hip hop, in a way, disco is the mother of hip hop, and hip hop culture and hip hop music and hip hop dance stands on James Brown's shoulders. You have to understand that as much as in New York City, natives want to like own hip hop and b-boying and freestyling and everything that James Brown brought to the game, you have to understand that everywhere else in the United States, James Brown was just as big, and every black and brown community, and San Francisco and the LA are both incredibly potent and well-populated black and brown cities. And we worshiped him. We went to every gig. He performed all over the country, and he's not from New York. He's from Atlanta. I mean, he's from Georgia, from Macon,
Yes.
from Augusta, and from all these different places down south. That's a down south thing, and it's an American thing. And all I'm trying to say is that the soul that came out of the Bronx, based on this revisiting a lot of old funk and soul records that a lot of these DJs like, Bam and Flash and Grand Wizard Theodore and DXT and, were digging through their parents' and older brothers and sisters' record collections. That's just as much a part of the Black experience all over America. And in many cases, depending on the community, Black and brown experiences, I would certainly imagine that would be true down in Florida and in Puerto Rican communities and Dominican communities in the Northeast, and in many cases, Chicano communities on the West Coast, and in Chicago and in Denver and places like that. That soul that blew up in New York in the late 70s and early 80s was also very much happening all over the country. The big difference, and the reason why hip hop happened in New York, is because New York is a special place, because of New York. I mean, Chicago has huge Black populations. It also has Latino and Chicano populations. So does Los Angeles. So does Houston. So does Philadelphia. So do a lot of other cities. But why did it happen in New York? Why did hip hop blow up in New York? Now, I don't know if I'm digressing and going off topic here.
No, but that's fine.
But it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, it is, because you're in California and you're listening to James Brown. Who else besides Aretha Franklin and them? Were you focused on that music that you were just so hypnotized by that? There was nothing else you were listening to besides funk? Were you into like rock? Were you into other music, or it was mostly that type of vibe of music?
Well, understand, we came back from Germany, as army brats, right? Living overseas. Father's a military officer. We came back in around 1966 to live in Fort Dix, New Jersey, which is not far away from New York City. And I'll never forget sitting down at the table in Germany, as a matter of fact, because I had met a kid whose father had died fighting in Vietnam, and that really shook me up. I didn't know what Vietnam was. It was not in the news. And I approached my father and I said, are you going to go to Vietnam? And he said, no, it'll never escalate. I'll never forget he said that. It'll never escalate. And we go back to New Jersey, to Fort Dix. And then one day he sits me down and says, Michael, I have to tell you something. You're the man of the family now, because I'm going to Vietnam. And that was like a big shock. So we end up moving out to San Francisco, where my grandmother lived. And I'm going to get to your question, by the way, don't worry. And we're living on the West Coast, living in San Francisco. My dad's in Vietnam. And we moved there in 1966. And it's only about 6 months later that the Summer of Love is about to hit. And that's all about peace, love, and hippies and the whole 9 yards. It's a time of real radical change. It was an anti-war movement time, which is very interesting. But it was the time when you had, you know, the Jefferson Airplane and Jimi Hendrix and the Grateful Dead and all these different bands are starting to blow up in San Francisco. And San Francisco is becoming this mecca for the free love, hippie, yippie freaks movement, right?
So it's like the Woodstock era, right?
The Woodstock era, before a couple of years before Woodstock would hit. And so we move out to San Francisco simply because that's where my grandmother was, and we're going to live in that city while my father's away. And it happened to be the same city with the military base, the Presidio, where all of my siblings were born. We were all born in San Francisco, and we would move somewhere else, and then we'd come back, and someone else.
So you have born. Brothers and sisters?
I have a younger brother, an older sister, and a younger sister. Yeah, and we were all born in San Francisco. So
awesome.
So it's kind of our home base in some ways. Even though by now I've lived in New York since 1978, and I consider it really my home. But so now we're living in San Francisco. And I have this older cousin named David Gaylord Montgomery, who was the coolest dude ever. I mean, he's, you know, everybody has that cousin who's just like so cool and you can't believe it. And you want to hang out with them and be close to them. And you can't believe you have this relative that's that cool. He was that dude. And he was like, he wasn't so much into the hippies. He was much more into what was going on in London. And he would like dress up like, you know, what was going on with the Rolling Stones, like wearing like a wild hairdo with like a shirt with like white ruffs coming out of the sleeves and a velvet jacket and velvet bell bottoms with pink suede shoes with buckles. And it was like, wow, David Gaylord, you know, take us to see the hippies. When we came back to San Francisco, we were like, take us to see the hippies, take us to see the hippies. And you know what he said? He said, I'm not a hippie. I'm a beautiful person. Hippies don't wear shoes. And we were like, oh. He was one of these cats who emulated and was into like what was going on in England with the whole glam, early glam of like the Rolling Stones and that whole vibe.
So would that be considered a modern fashion then at that time?
It would have been the hip modern thing. And he had a band that would cover like Yardbird songs and do them real fast. So it was kind of like pre-punk in a way. Modern women easy come by in this day and age. Laughing, joking, drinking, smoking, sure to have my way. And he would do these songs and he would wear it in his performances. He would wear these like military marshal hats with like khakis and almost like a fascist uniform with like a leather band. I mean, it was really all about like fashion and costuming. And so that was David Gaylord Montgomery, who the best way to describe him, his look would have been like Jimi Hendrix at the height.
I was actually visualizing Jimi Hendrix when you were talking about him.
And you can remember that album of Jimi Hendrix with him and his band, and they're dressed like these dandies, like English dandies with like velvet jackets and shirts with lots of like lace and a little bit of makeup and wild hairdos. I mean, it was the fashion, like the Stones and the Yardbirds and all these different bands. So I had one cousin on my mother's side of the family, David Gaylord Montgomery, on one side. And then on my father's side of the family, I had another cousin named Jimmy Holman Jr. Now, he was all about soul and funk and James Brown. And through my cousin David Gaylord Montgomery, I was introduced to all these amazing artists, like I said, the Yardbirds and Arthur Lee and Love, and all these really interesting like rock and psychedelic music. And from my other cousin, from my father's side of the family, from Texas, Jimmy, who, you know, they both lived in San Francisco, he would turn me on to everything that was all about soul and funk and the latest dances. And he was closer to my age, and so we hung out a lot more. And he's the one who would take me to see James Brown at the Cow Palace or at the Civic Center. he was the one who, you know, showed me how to like style and dance and do all the different dances. And, you know, because we were at a similar age, and, you know, and we'd go to the high school dances and you know, so it was a different vibe. But I always had one foot and one sense of appreciation with what my cousin Gaylord was doing, David Gaylord Montgomery, and then what my cousin Jimmy was doing. One was like kind of rock psychedelia. The other one was soul. And
That's
I
so
guess I've
dope.
always been, Flash, that kind of person who never settled for one thing. I always like to have a foot in different camps and be open-minded to a lot of different things and a lot of different influences.
That's amazing. Now, in that time when you're on both sides of the family, you're learning all that. Were you watching anyone dance besides the James Brown style? You didn't see anyone go down or anything, even a little peek of what you were gonna revisit in the future that you didn't even know you were gonna like go into this beautiful culture. Now, do you get any little hints of something to come, or was it just James Brown all over, Jimi Hendrix, Aretha Franklin? Were you into the Beatles and the
Oh
whole Bruce
yeah.
Springsteen and all that?
Well, no, Bruce Springsteen came much later. He's definitely a New Jersey thing. I'm not really into his sound.
Okay,
But
okay.
that came
Because you
much
mentioned
later.
Jersey, and I thought of Bruce Springsteen right away.
Yeah, yeah. But no, but the Beatles, I mean, everybody was into the Beatles. I mean, let me tell you something. You talk to a lot of hip hop heads of a certain age, they're going to be into the Beatles because if you're into music, you're into anything good in music, and you're going to be into anything good. And the Beatles were great. But I was into them. I was into Funkadelic. I was into, I mean, everything that was going on. That anything that was good that had, but then again, it's subjective. You know, what's good to me. You know, maybe something that I think is good may not be good to you. But anyway, but back to your point about dance. When it comes to dropping and going down and freestyle, all of that goes back to James Brown. I mean, it's true though that you had other artists like who would definitely use the floor, like Jackie Wilson. He was a boxer and an athlete, but you know, he did a lot of really great music at that time that we're talking about, mid late 60s. And Jackie Wilson was known for doing a lot of splits and spins and drops. James Brown, of course, was known for doing all kinds of dance moves, but a lot of stuff going down to the ground, drops, splits, for example. Like in middle school, in elementary school, we were all imitating James Brown. We were all doing drops and splits. Hell yeah. I mean, that was where the first B-boy awakening really comes from, is from James Brown and seeing him on film or on a TV show doing his thing. And you want to try to do a split. And then when you're doing splits, you're down there on the ground, you might try something else. You might try what would, you know, later on might be called, you know, sweeps or something, like, you know, Russian kicks and whatever. But freestyling didn't start with breaking. Let me tell you something. It didn't start in New York either. It was all over.
And I know the whole parties, when you go to parties and you dance with some of the girls, would you just throw down and do a split, a spin?
Yeah.
Now, what about the girls? Will their style be similar to the guys, or will they not? They'll be just more on top dancing.
More on top dancing, but you have to understand, and I don't know how much this was true or how much this is true going, like, say, past into the 70s and later, but in high school and junior high and high school, for me in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, we would have dances at high schools and at other high schools, so that you would have at least during the year, and at people's garage and basement parties as well. There was always the blue and red light, you know, parties with, you know, Kool-Aid and soda and potato chips and dips and dancing. And we lived for that. So like maybe every week or every other week, there'd be a party at somebody's crib or house, or there'd be a dance at your high school or junior high, or there'd be a dance at a high school or junior high that in some other neighborhood, or so even some other city, and you would travel to go to those parties. Now, what's important to understand, as far as the later 60s and early 70s, freestyle dancing and dancing to fast music was just as important as dancing to slow music, because we were teenagers, our hormones are raging, and there's nothing more you want to do, certainly I'm speaking for myself, than after you do 1, 2, 3 fast songs, all on turntables, people playing records, then somebody puts on a slow jam.
Definitely.
And the slow jammies would go like maybe 1, 2, maybe even 3 slow jammies before you went to a middle speed back to fast songs. Now, the slow jammies were important because you were like rubbing hard.
Definitely, yeah.
Against, this female, and you're grinding.
Yes.
And it is the most incredible experience that you can imagine, because this is all new to you, sexuality and being turned on and your hormones raging. This is amazing. This is powerful. So how sweaty and wasted you want to get on the fast music, you have to be careful that you've got something left over and you're a little smooth and you're cool. When the slow jammies come, you don't want to be like wet and dripping and sweaty, because a girl won't dance with you. And it was
now, do you remember any of the songs, any slow jams or anything?
Hell yeah.
Come on, mention a few of them. I want to hear them.
Okay. What were the big slow jammies that when they came on, you would jump up, and all your boys would be over on one side of the gymnasium, and you'd go over to a table where a bunch of girls were sitting. Strange girl you never met before, but you've been watching her, and you say, "Excuse me, but would you like to dance?" And then you've got to wait for her to either she'd look you up and down, no, and then turn away, and you just be like,
oh my!
Or she'd say yes, and you pick her up, and you'd go dance. And so when some of these songs that would come on that were just favorite slow jammies would be like, "It's a thin line between love and hate." It's a thin line between love and hate. Do. I mean, that type of track. Let me think. Did James Brown come? James Brown really didn't,
How about Marvin Gaye? Was he around at that time, Marvin Gaye?
Yeah, Marvin Gaye. Yeah, Marvin, thank you. So Marvin Gaye would come out with tracks. But I'm thinking of specific songs that were real slow grinders. Anything by the Delphonics. Anything by the Delphonics and the style. Philly had the most incredible sound. Now, Philadelphia is a serious music city, unlike any other in this country. And Philadelphia produced artists like the Delphonics, which was like a mad, slow, jammy a band. All those tracks that they did. Brenda and the Tabulations, The Touch of You. It was right on the tip of my tongue. They were, in those days, unlike tracks today that are dominated by, a lot of profanity and degrading terminology for women.
We're in a different world now.
Back then, it was like, "Baby, I love you, and come back to me, and I'm sorry." All the subtext of all these songs were always about a longing for love with a stranger you never met. Would she notice me, or I screwed up and hung out with somebody else, and will you please take me back? And all the songs, all the.
So I'm looking at your last name, Holman.
Yeah.
How about Eddie Holman?
Eddie Holman. There you go.
You see, I see your last name. I said Eddie Holman. Hey,
yeah, Eddie Holman. What was his big hit?
Hey There, Lonely Girl, wasn't it?
Hey There, Lonely Girl, Lonely Girl.
Now,
yeah.
you
no family,
somehow?
Not that I know of. It's possible, but not that I know of. I always wondered.
So that jam came up, and you're like, "Oh man, I gotta go and dance."
Oh yeah, I mean, when that came on, you had to get it. But there was, and okay, so now this is West Coast, right? This is like Bay Area. So another like really important sound in the Bay Area was TOP, Tower of Power.
That's right.
Snap! Now that we're talking slow jammies, we on the West Coast and in San Francisco, we knew instinctively that New York City was the shit. We knew it was the bomb. We knew it was the greatest city in the world, but it was so far away And if you hadn't really been there or had any family there or visited there, it was a very alien place. You really didn't know what New York was about, in the 60s and 70s, other than what you'd see in films, like Shaft, or you might see Superfly, which is like mind blowing. All these blaxploitation films, you're like, wow, New York is wild. You got a sense of what New York was about, but you didn't really know unless you were here, unless you spent time here. But we had our own sound and our own style. And I'll give you an example. Tower of Power, talk about slow jammies. Tower of Power had two important slow jammies in my life, and certainly to the Bay Area and to California, the California culture, Black and soul and Latino soul culture, was Your Diamond Sparkling in the Sand. You ever heard of it? Your Diamond Sparkling in the Sand?
Definitely.
Whoo! And the other one was You're Still a Young Man. You're still a young man, baby.
So now those songs are the late 60s, right? Like late 60s,
Still a Young
70s.
Man and Diamond Sparkling in the Sand would have come out in like 1970, 71. 70, 71. And those were our homeboys, right? Like, Sly the Family Stone, Graham Central Station, Tower of Power. These are like, the Whispers. These are like.
Were you into Otis Redding and all that?
Yeah. Otis Redding was cool. I remember Otis Redding when he did that song. When we first moved to California, he had just come out with the song Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. Which was a song about San Francisco. So we always felt like, oh man, that's about us, man. That's our thing. And but Otis Redding died young, so he really didn't get to get out there a lot. But back to Tower of Power, a very dear friend of mine who sadly passed away, Phase 2, Lonnie Wood. He's from the Bronx. But tears would come out of his eyes when he heard You're Still a Young Man. He knew about that West Coast sound. A lot of people knew about Tower of Power. And
he should have kept that So Very Hard to Go, if you remember that.
So Very Hard to Go. Very good flashback. Yo, wait a minute.
Yeah, man. I'm a DJ too. So I'm all about the classics. I go back to listening to music from the 50s, 60s, 70s, like 40 years from 50 to the late 80s, all those 40 years, like those 40 years there has such a amazing vibe that you can never capture it anymore. Like now, of course, we're in a different world, like I said earlier. But yeah, Tower of Power, all those beautiful slow jams, and I'll listen to my dad playing them, and I'll look at the tapes. Sometimes I'll record over the tapes. but yeah, man, I've always been to the slow jams, and to this day, I'm that passionate romantic guy that if I'll play a song and I got my wife here, I start singing it to her, just that vibe. Like I still got that old soul, even though I'm 45. But as a little kid, I was already paying attention to the older folks, always listening. So I got my little knowledge in music.
Yeah, every once in a while I'll put on these slow. I have a lot of 45s and albums. And I have my slow jammies, and I'll grab my wife and make her dance with me to Tower of Power anytime.
Yes,
anytime.
That's so beautiful.
She loves it, of course.
Now, around that time, who were your mentors and teachers that were kind of guiding you through life at that moment? It doesn't have to be anything with hip hop because we're not there yet. We're not into the culture yet. But around that time, who are your mentors, the people that were guiding you? And you mentioned your two cousins from different side. But besides them, do you have any old folks that were kind of pulling you to the side, talking to you and guiding you somehow?
Well, of course, your parents are always mentors. So parents are always mentors. There's nothing unusual about that. If you have good parents, they're going to always be mentors. But my grandmother on my mother's side, her name was Pauline Wood. She was really an important influence in my life. Really special person. She was originally from the East Coast. from Connecticut, and she moved out to the West Coast with my mother during World War II. And my grandmother was just one of these people. She's a Pisces like me. She was she's not alive anymore, but she was a Pisces like me. And like me, and I guess I got this from her, was always into a lot of different things. She designed children's clothes. She was an executive at the post office. She started her own insurance company. And these are things that were unusual for a Black woman at the time. She was very light-skinned like I am. And she actually could pass for white. And so she was a radical woman. So she would do things like in San Francisco during the 50s, after World War II, she would, for her Black friends, buy property in white neighborhoods where Black people weren't allowed to live, and then sell those properties to her Black friends, which was the reason why she actually did it in the first place. She integrated neighborhoods in that way. She was a delegate for the first UN. Now, you have to understand the UN is in New York City, but the very first UN, when it first broke out in 1955, was actually in San Francisco. Then it moved to New York after that. And my grandmother was a delegate on that. And then she became a leader in a very unusual and interesting religion called Baha'i, the Baha'i religion, which was very big into this idea of one world government. So my grandmother was just this really interesting, sophisticated world traveler, made films and shot film wherever she went, had a really good friend who was an Indian princess, would travel the world on cruises. Like I said, was a delegate with the UN, was a Black woman who integrated white neighborhoods. She's actually in the who's who of Negro, the Negro's Who's Who book of Who's Who or something like that. Wow. And so her name is Pauline Wood. I always looked up to her. She was very cool. And she was David Gaylord Montgomery's aunt.
Oh,
so
okay.
On my mother's side of the family, some very cool people, some very, very, very like interesting, unusual, worldly.
What side would be more on the artistic side?
Probably my mother's side of the family. But my father's side of the family, now what's interesting, both my parents look like me. Okay, I come from a long line of Black people who are obviously mixed race, right? But come from a very old American history of race mixing, slavery, and slave masters, raping their slaves and having these mulatto kids. So you consider
like red bone? Like when they say, oh, I'm a red bone.
I suppose, yeah. I suppose that I've been told that. But, that's an old history. And my father's side of the family actually comes from East Texas. And that's much more country and funky and soulful. And
you got that Southern hospitality down there.
The Southern thing. And then my mother's much more like New York and sophisticated. And so they were an interesting mix, And
so you're a product of them because
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you could chill in the village, but you can still chill in the Bronx with some brothers and have a conversation.
True. Man, you're good, Flash. You actually are very perceptive. You can actually see that in me because that is very true. And my time in New York was always, one foot was downtown in the art scene, with like having a band with Jean-Michel Basquiat called Gray and doing avant-garde experimental music. At the same time, I'm like going uptown and like, meeting the floor masters and interviewing Bambaataa and bringing that culture downtown.
Which so we're going to get to that because I want to dive in to like, let's say you're still in Cali, you finished high school, you're doing your thing now. When was it that you started transitioning to go to the East? And were you in California? Was there like graffiti already, or do you hear people rapping or even doing the poems or anything that has to do, like, for example, like The Last Poets, Jill Scott Heron around that time, all those artists, like, were you hearing all these?
Yes, very much. So I'm 68 years old, right? So I was in high school for 19.
You don't look, what? Did you just say, wait, what? Did you just say 68?
Yep, 68
No, there's no way. What the hell is going on here, man? I'm in the Matrix right now.
I got lucky genes. I'm
Wow,
lucky.
man, you look amazing.
I
I
try to
really
stay in
would have
shape.
given you, like, honestly, like, just because I know your history, I would have said 55, man. Like, or fit, like,
No,
wow, you
but
look
that doesn't
great.
make sense because if you do the math, I would
No,
have
I know
been.
it doesn't make sense. That's the point. It doesn't. You look great, man. Like,
Thank
whatever
you
you're
very
doing,
much.
keep doing it, man. Because 68, man. I know some brothers 68, they do not look like you at all.
I'm a runner. I run.
Oh, okay. So,
You know,
how's
that's
your
my
diet?
big thing. And I
How's your
like to
diet?
dance and I like to run, man. I think dancing keeps you young
What's
too.
your nutrition like? What's your type of?
I mean, I definitely, if I can, I would eat all organic food. I avoid anything that could have pesticides on it, but not not exclusively. I eat out at restaurants. I don't do anything too special. I avoid red meat just for reasons because red meat is, at my age, can cause a lot of trigger a lot of cancer, can be carcinogenic. Uh, I've avoided, I don't drink milk anymore because I use almond milk in cereal or
Yeah,
whatever.
man. I think
Um,
brothers are lactose intolerant by nature.
Maybe, but
Yeah.
I really try to stick to organic food as much as possible. But I'm not on any super strict thing. I'm not a vegan or anything like that, but I try to eat healthy. I try to eat salads and mixed foods, and I definitely avoid as much as possible processed food. Like
There you go.
food that's been packaged, that has a lot of salt, that has a lot of chemicals in it. I mean, you got to stay away from that stuff. You have to stay away from that stuff. But anyway,
Absolutely. So now,
but I think
heading.
exercise is important, super
So I
important.
was gonna ask you, like, maybe it's the exercise. You always moving. One of the things that I've learned through reading so many books. I'm a book reader. I'm all about books, and I always catch these authors talking about when it comes to nutrition, or not even nutrition, but staying healthy. I remember a quote that I read. It says, "If you stop moving, you start aging."
Wow.
Once I heard that, I was like, wow, that makes so much sense, because even if I stay a whole week without doing exercise, your body literally starts like getting like, then you're
Cramped up.
10 man at the end of the year, at the end of the
Yeah.
month. Then you're like, I can't move that right. You start feeling old. So,
Yeah.
keep doing what you're doing, man. You look great, man. I'm so
Wow. Thank
shocked
you.
that you're 68, dude. I'm like, what?
It,
That is crazy.
dude, it sometimes shocks me too. I'll go like,
You've seen a lot. You've seen a lot, man. We're in 2023. You've
I've
seen
seen
a
a
lot.
lot. I have
So,
seen a
so,
lot.
so talk to me about heading to the East before hip hop. Like, I want to hear your culture shock. Your whoa, what just happened?
Oh, okay. So let me give you a great culture shock moment. It's Los Angeles, 1972. I'm in high school, and I'm reading in the LA Free Press. I forget the magazine. It's kind of like the Village Voice or something. And Rufus and Chaka Khan are going to be playing at the Whiskey A Go Go. I'm like, bet. I'm forking out my afro, got on my velvet jacket, my satin jean, my satin bells, platform shoes. I'm Soul Brother going out to see Rufus and Chaka Khan.
That's awesome.
And I get to I get in line to go to the Whiskey A Go Go to buy my ticket, and there's a lot of white kids there, and they're like wearing what later on would look like punk gear, like guys and gals wearing like black eyeliner and spiky up hair, and a lot of black and leather. And I'm like, wow, that's cool. They want to come and see Rufus. That's cool. Good for them. I'm glad that Rufus has kind of I didn't expect that. I go inside, and there's no brothers and sisters there at all. And like, I'm the only person of color, and like everybody there is, again, like very, I don't know, like I don't know if you how educated your audience is in terms of like old rock. So I get there, and it's kind of like a early glam rock look. It's kind of like David Bowie vibe, with makeup and extreme gear. And there's a table sitting right there at the front of the stage, and I'm like, wow, nobody's sitting. And there was a time when I would go out by myself. I would just go to parties by myself and go to events by myself. And I sat there. I thought, wow, I have a great table. A woman gives me a drink. Everybody else is kind of like staying back by the bar. And then the curtain comes up, and it was a metal store front, like clank, 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 metal gate that would have, you'd have in a bodega or something. And on stage are these like 4 white dudes in black leather playing the fastest, hardest like rock I had ever heard. Like, and I'm like going, this is not Rufus. And then this little skinny white blonde dude comes out from the side of the stage wearing like a little like leather bikini with fishnet stockings, platform boots up to his like knees, and a dog collar and black eye makeup around his eyes. And he's screaming and yelling. He's bashing himself in the mouth with the microphone, and blood's going everywhere. It's getting on me. And I'm going, this is not Chaka Khan. It was Iggy Pop and the Stooges. And what had happened was I misread the ad. I thought it was going to be Rufus and Chaka Khan. I was looking at the wrong date, which I often do, make these kind of mistakes.
Oh, wow.
And I'm thinking I'm seeing Rufus and Chaka Khan playing Tell Me Something Good, right? And that was like the big hit of the time. And it's Iggy Pop and the Stooges. And my mind was blown. And in a good way, I was given this where I had been in LA at that time, very much all about soul and, everything from the Ohio Players to Isley Brothers, to all the stuff that was happening in like 71 and 72. I was getting a real dose of what would later on become punk rock, which at that time was just called, I don't know what it was called, hard rock. And it just gave me this open door to like appreciate all kinds of things, and so I got to see Iggy Pop in 1972 at his height.
Now, did you know it was Iggy Pop until you saw him, or you didn't even know yet?
I didn't even know. Yeah, I didn't even know who that was until I left. And went, who was that? It was like Iggy Pop and the Stooges. Like, oh wow! Like I'd heard of him, but I didn't know who. I didn't know that sound. I didn't know that music. But I'll tell you that I suppose just 4 or 5 years earlier, time is so funny when you're young. Just a year makes such a huge change.
Yeah.
When you're older, it means nothing. But maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years earlier in San Francisco, hanging out with my cousin, David Gaylord Montgomery, who would have appreciated Iggy Pop and the Stooges. And even though he was like light-skinned black brother, he was not about soul. He was only about, rock and glam rock and that type of music. He was turning me on to like this band called Them, which the lead singer was Van Morrison, doing songs like Gloria, Gloria, Gloria.
Oh, wow, Van Morrison.
And then he turned me on to a 2-tone band called Love with lead singer Arthur Lee, who my cousin looked just like Arthur Lee, light-skinned brother, in a band with another brother played bass, and then like 2 or 3 other white guys. And that band was called Love. And Arthur Lee was the leader of that band. And they were easily the first punk band. When they did this cover of a Burt Bacharach song called Little Red Book, they did it intentionally super fast and stripped down. And it was very much like what would be happening in New York with the Ramones. And this would have been 66 when Love came out with Little Red Book. It would have been another 4 or 5 years before the Ramones came out playing really fast and hard music. So, and this was a black artist doing that. So, that's really interesting. And I was turned on to Love by my cousin, David Gaylord. And so, I was like, I was always interested in as many things as possible that were really good. And I suppose that was, growing up, moving every 18 months somewhere in another part of the world and like spending time with a completely different culture and like going, okay, that's cool. Okay, you have different kind of food. You wear different kinds of clothes. You have different kinds of folk culture and music. Traveling, let me tell you something. And this is the greatest tragedy about America. You know, we we have the money, people have the funds, but we are a country where only a very small, I think it's something like 15% of our population has a passport. I mean, and that's tragic. And apparently, out of that 15% that have passports, only like 20% of them use it. So all I have to say is one of the greatest gifts that you can give to yourself when you get a little bit of money is to find a way on a budget to travel, go someplace unexpected, go to Marrakesh in Morocco, go to Cape Town in South Africa, or Nairobi in Kenya, go to Munich in Germany, go to London, go to Tokyo, go travel to the Caribbean, just go someplace where you've never been, and trust that it's not going to be scary. You're not going to be under threat, and open your mind and your heart to what other people are thinking and doing, because it will give you such an incredible advantage in life, and it will feed your mind and your spirit and your soul. It will make you a completely different person. You don't need flashy cars. You don't need flashy clothes. You don't need, expensive jewelry and stuff. What you need to do is invest in traveling and being and going to other places and meeting other people. That's richness. That's wealth.
That's amazing. It's crazy because I've followed that since I was 17 years. I've been to 48 countries. I traveled.
Wow.
And after that, I was like, I told my wife's been to 2 countries, and I told her, I said, listen, what I've learned in life, everything I've learned has been through culture. Exactly what you just said. Going to these countries, to Egypt, to just different, having conversations. I'm a social butterfly. So I always ask questions. I'm always been curious of just knowing how other people live in different worlds, in different countries, because as you know, United States of America, everyone wants to come out here. But then I always wonder why, but at the same time, I ask myself, why is it that there's so much fear put onto Africa? Oh, don't go to Africa. Don't go here. Don't go there. And I realize, I tell people, man, don't listen to none of that. Don't listen to that, because you start creating, like, you really get cultured. And I could tell by your personality, culture, different culture, and you've expanded your horizons when it comes to fashion and all sorts of different races and different countries. And that's a beautiful thing you said that. And listen, I'm gonna listen to that again, because that is so amazing you said that. And I want the viewers and the listeners to actually take that into consideration and do that, because it changes your mentality. Every time I go, like, let's just mention even like where my parents are from. I was born in New York City, but my parents are from the Dominican Republic. All I could take is a trip to Dominican Republic, come back, and on the way back, I'm so inspired.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It's
You
like
got your batteries charged.
something. I don't know. I don't know if it's like the magnet of the earth, the longitude and latitude of the place you're at. There's something magical about going to different places.
I'm just curious, what brought you to so many different countries?
Well,
That's a lot of countries.
Yes. Well, after, if you remember the show Jam on the Groove,
Yeah.
I already know that you know that. After Jam on the Groove, I got inspired by that show. I saw that show when it first came out at the Millennium Lane Theater. Honey Rockwell, and I know you probably know who she is, Honey Rockwell.
Yeah, course.
She was my first teacher. She was the first person at a skating ring to teach me a 6-step. And this is like 93, 94. And when she gave me tickets to this show, I made my decision immediately what I wanted to do in my life. Because I'm from Uptown Manhattan, which they call Washington Heights, or let's say Inwood Heights. I'm from Inwood.
I
and
lived in
born and
Inwood for
raised.
8 years.
Look at that! Wow, I was born and raised in Harlem, but then I moved like around 6 years old to Inwood, and I was there. I lived literally on Dykeman, like Dykeman Street, 200 Dykeman.
I lived on
That's my.
Seaman. I lived on
Oh my God,
Seaman.
you were in Seaman Avenue?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Seaman
that's awesome.
and 204.
Oh my God, man. Yeah, I used to go down the hill on Seaman. Like
Yeah.
Seaman, that's been my hood forever. And I moved out here in 2004 to Orlando, Florida. And let me tell you, once I saw Jam on the Groove, I remember sitting on the theater seat watching the show. And I'm getting into breaking already. I was already a martial artist, so I already traveled a few little cities and countries doing martial arts, but it was fading for me because I saw breaking. But that moment, I was with my sister. I was like 15, 16. My sister took me to see a show. And, she's preparing me for college. She's like, you're going to graduate. You're going to go straight to college and all this. And I'm sitting here like, I don't want to do that. I want to do what they're doing. I want to travel. Like, and when Honey's like, hey, I'm going to Brazil. I'm going to Israel. And I'm like, what? You're doing what you're doing? She's like, yeah. So she came back, and then this show called Break, the Urban Funk Spectacular, was like a mock-up of that show that happened in 1997 by the producer. You probably know who this guy is. He goes by Steve Love.
No, I don't know.
Steve Love, and it was Love Productions. So it came out. It was an off-Broadway show. It was literally kind of like Jam on the Groove. I'm not going to say 2.0, but it was a little less hip-hop because, the times changed, late 90s. So I toured with this show called Break, the Urban Funk Spectacular, and we went everywhere. Plus, Curtis Blow, I was one of his backup dancers when Speedy D from New York City Breakers and London, they put me down with New York City Breakers as a b-boy to do shows with them. So we went to Japan, China, Russia. We did a lot of stuff all over. And then we got picked up by, Tom Joyner.
Yeah.
Tom Joyner,
the radio
host,
guy. Yeah.
the radio guy. He had a show. It was like a cruise called it was like an old school boat. So he'll bring Earth, Wind and Fire, the OJs. He had Sugar Hill Gang there. He had the Gap Band. He had so many. Kool Moe Dee was there. So we went on the ship with Curtis Blow. So we started traveling with Curtis Blow, and that's when I just got the fever of traveling. I did my own travelings alone, but Break, the Urban Funk Spectacular, and Curtis Blow, they were the reason why I traveled so much at an early age. I started at 17. I even needed like consent from my parents to travel. My first place was Singapore. No, Korea. Seoul, Korea was my first like overseas country. And let me tell you, I will go back to the hood and talk to my boys in the block, and I'm just telling them, dude, you guys need to travel. Like,
yeah,
they always saw me like a different character in the block because I had something different that all these guys didn't have, and it was because I traveled. So when you were saying that, I was like, man, he's so correct on that because I still live by that. And there's so many other countries that I want to visit. And hopefully I go with my wife and just show her all the places that I've been to. But that's how I got to like travel the world with Curtis Blow and New York City Breakers at that time. And the Break, the Urban Funk Spectacular. And it was a pretty dope show. It was from 1997 all the way 2010. And then the show kind of like started fading out when the Jabberwockies came into town. When the Jabberwockies blew up, there was no show touching the Jabberwockies that were as close as them. And I was witnessing it with my own eyes. Like we weren't getting the contract again the following year. And then I'll see them in the theater. Yeah, Jabberwockies. And I'm like, oh, okay. But it was a fun ride. I'm still an entertainer. I run my own entertainment company out here. I do weddings, corporate events. I travel here and there doing that. Sometimes they fly me to Colombia to do weddings, Mexico, and I just do things. And this is like my hometown now, Orlando. And I like where it's at because I could fly from here to New York. I could take
Right.
a flight from here to anywhere. It's kind of like JFK, but in a different vibe because you got more of the Caribbean close to
Right.
me.
Right.
So that's been my travel. That's why I've traveled so much, and there's still so much to go, man. Like
Oh yeah.
so much, and
Things change.
yes,
But you know, you were asking about before coming to New York.
Yes.
In high school in San Francisco, I was in high school in San Francisco for about a year, and then the last 2 years of high school was in LA. In San Francisco, you mentioned the group, the Last Poets had just come out, and that was a real interesting moment, you know, with Curtis Mayfield and the Last Poets, and you mentioned the other artists too, Gil Scott Heron. You know, this is a time for real awareness, real conscientious music, and you know, people talking about the truth and talking about what was going on in life, and not just, you know, the glitz and glamour of like the Motown sound or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was happening right around 1970, and then going down to Los Angeles from 71 to 72, 73. I remember another moment that was a real, just like the Iggy Pop and the Stooges moment, that was so dramatic. I'll never forget where I was. I was actually in our home. We lived in Carson, California, near Long Beach, where Snoop Dogg is from, and right next to Compton, actually. My dad was going to school. He was getting his master's at USC after retiring from the military. And anyway, I was in our house, just about to leave the door to walk out to get into my little Volkswagen Bug, candy colored blue with fat tires, total LA look. And on the radio comes the Ohio Players playing Pain.
Ooh.
And that was just, I remember going, what is this sound? And that's when the Ohio Players came out. And it was such an amazing moment. But again, when you think about it, Pain, because it's so slow, is not like a high energy dance record. But this is also at around that same time that like I was telling you, on Friday afternoons, we would have these like dance parties at school, at our high school. And we would be doing all the latest dances, like the Good Foot. And it was amazing to be in a crowd of maybe like 100 kids, and everybody's doing the same dance. So everybody's doing the Good Foot to the Good Foot, or everyone's doing the Rock Steady. And there'd always be somebody who would find a slightly different way to do the dance than everybody else. But you would think you were watching Soul Train, really. We were tired, or we'd be locking, or doing a lot of all these different California dances. But this is the time really when I'm feeling like, okay, this is like freestyle. This is like, you know, doing the moves you want to do, you know, doing the splits, doing all these different moves. And LA had its own freestyle scene. And you can see hints of it when you watch early 1970, 1971, 72 Soul Train episodes.
Mm-hmm.
This is also the time that my sister, who was in college and was going to a school called Scripps outside of LA in Pomona, she would take me to Mavericks Flats, which is in Crenshaw, which is in the Crenshaw neighborhood in LA, which is like a black neighborhood in LA. And we'd be in line to get into the flats, and this white girl and a whole troupe of like sort of like colorfully costumed, almost like clowns, dancers would just troop in and just walk in. And it was Tony Basil and Don Campbell and all the Lockers, and they were the stars, and they were on Soul Train, but they were everywhere. And we would go into these clubs, like small little intimate clubs, and there'd be Don Campbell and Tony Basil, rocking, doing,
locking it up,
Campbell
locking it up.
locking. And I'm like, wow, man. And you're in LA. And so like, that these people were just on TV and yet they're in this club. So that whole the glamorous nature of that you get in New York when you see stars walking down the street, you also got in LA, because LA has a lot of stars too.
Definitely.
And so that was going on at the same time that wow, what else was going on? Like going to clubs in Hollywood and finding a party. You go to a party in Hollywood, and all of a sudden, you're this high school kid, and you're like hanging out with like grown ass people who are like movie stars and stuff. And you're like, wow, this is intense. But there was always like some wild thing going on with music and dance that was different and interesting and strange. Like Steppenwolf was this rock band that did this song called Magic Carpet Ride. And Magic Carpet Ride, da 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 da. Why don't you come with me, little girl, on a magic carpet ride? And you don't. And the brothers and sisters would just go off to the part of that song. This is a German band,
Yes.
Kraftwerk came later. Was that record would have this kind of like weird jazz fusion part that just lost the beat for about a minute, and we would all just stand around waiting for this to pass, waiting for this part of the record to pass. And then it would come back to the doom 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 doom. It was just this weird thing that I always remembered about the frustration of that particular song. But the thing I was going to mention was during this time of locking and popping and all these great James Brown tracks that were going on in 70, 71, 72, while I was in high school in LA, there was something else that was happening. And I had this really good friend. He was Filipino and black. And we would get some Boone's Farm strawberry wine and drive out drunk on the freeway to somewhere else out in Los Angeles, in East Los Angeles. And it was mostly Chicanos and some white kids. And they had a whole music sound system going. And they're playing Bowie and Mott the Hoople and T-Rex. And they're doing this whole glam thing. Okay. And what was interesting about that was the dance that was done at these parties. The same time, same week, you'd be in Hollywood, doing popping and locking, or in Crenshaw, and then in East LA, you'd go out to this, heavy Chicano party, young Chicanos who were into English glam, doing this dance called the tightrope. And what was cool about the tightrope was like, the fashion was like platform shoes like this, right? And so platform shoes like this, like if you ran to catch a bus, you're going to break your ankle. You're going to fall in the street.
It's like you're running on heels.
Yeah, and you can't do crazy wild dance. You can't do splits and things like that with platform shoes.
It was called tightrope? I've never heard of that.
Wow, so the tightrope was you're dancing like you're walking on a tightrope to the beat. And the way you moved was very in line with the David Bowie's music and T-Rex's music and that glam rock music. It fit perfectly. And so that was a lot of fun. But then again, older Chicanos at that time would have been heavy low riders. And they weren't into that. They were into soul jammies. Even though there was a lot of like tension between the Chicanos at that time and blacks in Los Angeles, Chicanos who were rocking those lowriders, who were taking those cars and putting in hydraulics and both front and back on each corner, wearing Pendleton shirts with crocus sack shoes, greased back hair, bandanas,
Yep.
Chinos with iron creases. Their girlfriends would have giant black beehive hairdos with like the most intense like pencil lined eyebrows,
Yeah.
like insect eyebrows
Yeah, it
with
sounds like a
giant, like
movie.
heavily sprayed, I don't know what you would call that, teased up hair. And they would be chilling in these lowriders that you kind of saw years later in rap videos by people like, Dre and Ice-T
Yes, yes, yes.
and Ice
So it's like they
Cube.
brought it back. They brought it back.
Black at Los Angeles people were kind of copying the style of the Chicanos, who had really pioneered the idea of these lowriders with hydraulics in them, and they called it dancing. These guys, I'll never forget being from San Francisco, because of all the hills, you don't have lowriders. You can't do that to your car. San Francisco was a hot rod city. All the cars were all about jacked up with big motors and racing. LA was about going slow and cool with your car, with the head of the front of the car up and the back of the car dragging on the ground and going real slow. And you would have, and they would parade down the street down in East LA, and one car would go out into the intersection and block all the traffic, while the other cars would then make a turn, and they would dance. So that by dancing, they would turn on the hydraulic buttons, and these cars would jump down the street, spreading all these sparks, because the oil pan would hit the street, and then they would drive off. And these cars were so beautiful. They were made so well. They stopped having, like, you see these Teslas with no handles. They did that way long time ago. They found ways to find parts of the car in the back of just in the style of the car in the back window, that you would push something and it would open the door. They took all the handles off.
That's so dope.
I mean, there's this whole Chicano aesthetic and style in Los
When you're
Angeles.
mentioning that, I'm thinking of the movie Cheech and Chong, like their style, the way, and there's
the
one
Pendleton,
of them,
those like plaid Pendleton shirts, and but the thing is that truth be told, that style of Pendleton shirts and khakis and chinos and crocus sack shoes, Black kids got that from the Chicano kids, and they rocked it in the 80s. And you see it in hip hop. The Chicano kids, truth be told, as they were rocking that style in the 50s and 60s, they got it from white boys who rocked that style and were dropping their cars and chopping down the hoods of their cars right after World War II in the 40s and 50s. That was the hot rod culture. So they were dropping their cars to the ground. They were wearing Pendletons. They were doing the whole lowrider thing, but in a white boy style without the hydraulics. And then the Chicanos came in and added hydraulics and these incredible paint jobs. And then, it got passed on through a lot of different cultures. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people wouldn't want to admit to that.
I've never heard of that story, and it's amazing because, wow, I never even knew that it was like that. Because, of course, the mainstream movies and all the stuff that was going on, especially around Dr. Dre time, and they always show like the East LA, and you see East LA, you see some Chicano, the low riders, and then all the
one thing
NWA.
I wanted to mention, the reason I brought up the lowriders was because of the music. So you would, if you lived in LA and you were a working class Chicano dude and you had your girlfriend and you rocked that uniform that I was talking about, and you had your lowrider, a Chevy, 64 Chevy, or a lot of Chevys. The Chevys were really popular. But they had all kinds of vehicles, trucks and cars and everything. Nowadays, it's really democratic. But back then, it was a lot of Chevys. And you would be low riding with your girl, and it was right out of something from like 1,000 years ago in Mexico. This whole like ancient aesthetic of the Mayans brought up through through Los Angeles and Los Angeles mechanized car culture. But what was interesting was the music they played. All Black slow jammies. Like on their radios, they would be playing Eddie Holman. They would be playing all these different classic low. If all you have to do for your audience, I can't remember all the songs now, but Google on YouTube lowrider classics, and you'll hear them. What was the Summertime and the Living is who is that? I'm trying to remember these names. It's so hard to remember these names now because I have so much data in my head now that it's hard to find these things. But but there would be these sounds and these bands that were like these classic soul bands. I'm Your Puppet, for example. I'm your puppet. Da 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 da. Like puppet was like a classic slang for Chicanos in LA, like, yo, puppet, what's up, puppet? Or little this, or little that, just like in Black Kids. I mean, they got that from the Black Kids, like taking these names and these odd names and, a gang names or street names. But like all the songs were these slow jammies, slow soul jammies would be playing on these Chicano lowrider radios. And I'm like seeing this from California going, wow, this is wild. Like, because I'm an outsider, I'm seeing it with fresh eyes. And that's kind of what happened when I came to New York. I could see New York from these California fresh eyes. It's objectivity. I could see it with objectivity in a way that even the locals didn't understand. It was so anyway, getting to California, I graduate high school in LA at Narbonne. And I go back to San Francisco to attend the University of San Francisco. And now it's disco. And it's like 1973, 74. And some of the first disco classics are coming out, like Eddie Kendrick's Going Up in Smoke. And I can't remember now some of his early tracks, Boogie Down Baby. And a lot of these songs, he's starting to break away from the whole Motown Temptations thing, going solo, starting to get turned out by these producers in Philadelphia who are starting to experiment with a new sound. And that new sound is the hi-hat opening up. This is a new thing that's coming out in the mid-70s, and it's disco.
Wow.
And it is going to change everything. But there's also a lot of other things happening. When I remember coming back to San Francisco, having a roommate who's from Connecticut and hearing about this East Coast vibe. And him being in, I remember him, McKelvey, is a brother from Hartford, Connecticut. And he was really turning me on to all these like different jazz things. Like I was getting turned on to Miles Davis. Bitches Brew was happening. Like listening to jazz music while you're in college is like definitely a cool thing to do. But Funkadelic is starting to come out with like Up From the Downstroke and Earth, Wind and Fire is coming out with a new sound. And there's a lot of really exciting things happening in 1973, 74. But I'm also dropping acid for the first time. And I'm listening to Emerson, Lake and Palmer from England, and like Brain Salad Surgery. I remember like tripping on acid in my dorm room at USF, and people are coming out from a basketball game, and I turned all my speakers out the window, and I'm playing Brain Salad Surgery by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, which is like this English electronic synthesizer sound. And I'm conducting them as they're almost like Fantasia, Mickey Mouse and Fantasia, conducting them as they're going down the street. It was so funny, man. That's hilarious. Discovering acid was like kind of a big deal.
And I know that was a big thing around that time. That was huge.
Yeah. And so now I'm in San Francisco, and I'm back in San Francisco, and I'm in university, and I remember it was a trick or treat, Halloween. It's Halloween, maybe 1974 Halloween, and my roommate, who's from the East Coast, doesn't know anything about the West Coast. And I see in the newspaper that Iggy Pop and the Stooges is playing at Mr. D's for Halloween. And I'm like, okay, man, let's go to see Iggy Pop and the Stooges. He had no idea who that was. But I'm gonna blow your mind. You think you're cool,
Yeah.
you think you know something. Let me show you something really wild. So we go, dropped a tab of acid, a quarter acid actually, and we're going to this club, and we're already starting to trip. And I'm thinking, wait till he sees Iggy Pop and the Stooges. Turned out Iggy Pop and the Stooges didn't show up. And when we got to the club and we're looking at the band playing, my mind's blown because I'm looking at this band on stage. It was a raked audience, so like the seating was down like this, and the band was down. You're looking down at the band, and this band's playing, and it's not Iggy Pop and the Stooges. And they're a costume band. They're wearing all these wild costumes. But the thing that blows my mind is nothing that I'm looking at has any color. There's no color. There's all the instruments, the speakers, the costumes that they're wearing, even their faces, an all Caucasian band, even their faces were shades of gray or black or white. And I'm thinking, wait a second, this can't be. And I realized that I'm looking at a group of artists performing this rock music, and somebody in the band had made a conscious decision to make sure that there was no color whatsoever, so that people in the audience are looking at a three-dimensional black and white film. See this guy down below me, the DJ on your
Yes.
show?
Yes.
It was like that.
Wow.
Can you imagine a live show and
Yes.
there's no color anywhere?
No colors. Even the lighting is just black
Even
and
the
white.
lighting.
Everything.
Thank you. Even the lighting. There was no color in the lighting. And Flash, it hit me right then and there that I was an artist because I recognized that what I was looking at, somebody, some creative person had to have come up with this idea, figured out a way to execute it, and then executed it perfectly so that they blew my mind, acid or not. And I realized that's an artist. And for me to recognize it and to be inspired by it and want to and for it to change my life, much like the way you were inspired when you saw B-boying for the first time.
Yeah.
I realized that was done by an artist, and I'm one too. And I always have been. My whole life, I was always like making things and painting pictures and doing this and building that. I'd always been like fiddling with things and making literally paintings to hang up on walls, even as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old. And I went, okay, they're calling me. And then through some weird serendipity, months later, I'm at a disco, and one of the band members of that band, the person, Michael Cotton, who actually did that design, who actually made sure everything was black and white or shades of gray, who actually had this spray airbrush thing with different color acrylic paint, and painted all of his bandmates with so that there would be the shadowing, just like this character, this DJ character you have.
So crazy.
I met him and he said, yo, man, you're a great dancer. Because I was big time. I'd been to New York for over a summer. I got to tell you about that. And I'd come back, and the way I was dressed, I was wearing marshmallows, big white sole shoes, like almost like nurse shoes with big white soles. They were called marshmallows with different colors. I had peg leg pants. I had this whole, like, what was then for black kids and Latino kids from the Caribbean in New York and in Los Angeles and in San Francisco. Our glam rock in Europe and in England, it was dressing like Ziggy Stardust, like aliens.
Okay.
But that's not how we dressed. Our glam rock was wearing 1930s and 40s thrift shop gear, like Dr. Buzzard's original Savannah band.
Yes.
Okay, that was our look. And glam in America was wearing thrift shop 30s and 40s gear, but with like new shoes, with like platform shoes and like and all kinds of really crazy shoes. Sometimes old shoes too. We'd find these shoes from the 30s and 40s. Those clothes were so well made that they lasted into the 70s, and you could get them at thrift shops. So I'm wearing all this gear, and this guy, Michael Cotton, who's a big fan of New York, is like, he comes up to me and says, "Hey man, are you from New York?" And I was like, and anybody who was cool and smart would always go like, "Yeah, you would kind of bluff like you were from New York, but you weren't. You were from California, but you always tried to make it sound like you were from New York." And I bet you people still do that to this day.
Yes.
But the way I was dressed, the way he was dressed, it was like, yo, man, you must know what time it is. And he invited me to be part of this band, and I joined the Tubes and traveled the country with the Tubes in this theatrical rock. Now, what the Tubes are, it was a theatrical rock band that every song had a different set and stage and dancers and TV monitors and films. And it was really my reawakening to become an artist, was being a member of the Tubes. Dropped out of school for a year. I did go back and got my degree, but I dropped out of school for the year and went on the road. Made, I was a dancer. I was choreographed, wore costumes, made costumes, made sets, made props. It was just, and we did it all for no money. It was just a lot of fun. Well, a lot of important people came out of the Tubes. One of them is Kenny Ortega, who is a choreographer who choreographed Dirty Dancing and directed films and directed all of Michael Jackson's shows throughout the 90s. Kenny Ortega directed the Tubes. That's, I worked with him. I was one of his dancers.
Now, what was the name of that band? Black and White.
Tubes.
So that was actually the
Tubes? Was the Tubes.
The one that you're on acid and you're watching this Black and White show.
Right.
So I can really just imagine how you saw it. Like, especially the intensity. You're on acid and you're watching this, like,
the Tubes.
So it took over.
But here's what's interesting. Before that moment, the summer before that, my parents, after my dad got his degree, right, after leaving the military and got his master's degree, and then my whole family moved to the East Coast. They moved to Maryland, outside of DC. And my father's working for the government, blah, blah, blah. So my mother's family all live in DC. Most of them live in Washington, DC. And they're the coolest kids. My cousins Brenda and Peggy and Donna. And they were going to school at Bowie State. And they had a friend from Yonkers. And so I had driven my little Volkswagen Bug with my older sister across the United States. And now I'm in DC for the summer. And my cousin's like, let's go to New York. So we drive to New York. This is mind-blowing. We drive to New York. It's 1974. We end up going to discos like Les Jardins. We're in the subway in 74, and I'm seeing these gangs from New York. It could have been it's a 74. It could have been anybody. It could have been definitely gangs from Brooklyn and from the Bronx.
It could be the Savage No
Ghetto
Bads.
Brothers. Could have been the Savage No Bad, Savage Skulls. It could have been any of the. It could have been the Black Spades. And they were in the subway, and I'm looking at them like I had never seen anything like this before. And they were intimidating people, tourists on the platform. And I was lucky I was on the local platform, and they were on the express platform. They weren't near me. There was train tracks between us. But I was just like blown away. This is way before the Warriors, but it was that style. And I had just seen, as a matter of fact, The Education of Sonny Carson, where those Brooklyn gangs were featured in that film, like the Lords, the Tomahawks were these Brooklyn gangs that were in that film. So I'm seeing all this, and then there was their friend, I forget her name, said, okay, we're going to do something really special on Sunday. We're going to go to Bethesda Fountain in Central Park. So we all go to Bethesda Fountain in Central Park, and it's a Sunday afternoon, a beautiful day. The sun is out. It's maybe like noon or 1 p.m. And there's a good couple of thousand kids from all over the city, from the Bronx, from Brooklyn, from Queens, from Manhattan, from Staten Island. They're from all over. And the fashion is that look I was telling you about, Dr. Buzzard's original Savannah Band, that whole 1930s zoot suit, Cab Calloway look, and women wearing summer dresses from the 1930s and 40s with those pencil line eyebrows and platform shoes, and doing the Latin hustle to disco music. So that's the look. Now, here's the music. There must be about 50 or 60 boom boxes, all tuned to WBLS, all up on the hills around Bethesda Fountain, facing towards Bethesda Fountain, all tuned to one station, Frankie Crocker playing BLS. And he's playing the hits. He's playing MFSB, Love Is the Message, and he's playing all these great disco hits, the Tramps, on and on and on. And kids are out there on this on the cobblestone area of around Bethesda Fountain. Like I said, doing the Latin hustle, doing the bus stop, which is the formation dance. Everyone's moving forward and moving back.
Kind of like the original electric slide.
The original electric slide. And by the way, that whole formation dance goes back to the 50s. People were doing that back in the 1950s. Don't get it twisted.
Yep.
In different configurations. And then further out, there's a row of brothers and Latino brothers and Black brothers playing congas.
Yes.
Drumsticks on glass bottles, cowbells, all to whatever's playing on the radio. And people are going off. And I'm this California kid watching all this, realizing that the ultimate dancers, the ultimate coolest dancers are Black and Latino New Yorkers. There's something about the way they shared style and rhythms together, this mix of primarily Puerto Rican and then Southern Blacks that had come up from the South, and then Blacks from Jamaica and the Caribbean had grown up, their first generation, like you. And maybe your older brothers and cousins, or maybe even your parents, that you just didn't see on the West Coast. You didn't see this kind of way of moving, this kind of like, I think, what I think it is? I think the style that they had was like Gothic goblins. They were like New Yorkers who were like Batman. They were like goblins. They were Gothic. They were moving in this way that was on the DL, was on the down low, it was like sneaking, and a little bit of crime mixed in with this, and a little bit of like, stick up kid style mixed with it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the style is like very, like you said, goblin style. I
like
get what you're saying.
It's gangster is what it is.
Yeah,
it's
which
later
on I heard it as the Muggsy style. Like Ken Swift, you have
there you go.
You have that Muggsy look there.
There you go.
So amazing. Wow.
There you go.
I've never heard it that way interpreted.
Yeah, but because I'm seeing it from these fresh California eyes, and we just don't dance that way. You look at Soul Train, it's super athletic. Soul Train, it's super
and happy, like too much fun.
Happy, fun, popping, locking. And then I come east, and it's more like, it's like chilling, sneaking. And you know what I saw? I'll never forget this. I'm at the Bethesda Fountain, and there is a platoon, a squad of Bboys. They look like they were wearing peg leg pants. They had they were either wearing like marshmallows or Clarks or whatever, what have you, right? And they've got the pajama tops, short sleeves, pajama tops.
Yep.
Later on, polo would take on that look, but before it was pajama tops with all kinds of crazy prints and patterns, with like Applejack caps, the big roadster Applejack caps or gangster caps, or even like thrift shop, gangster, zoot suit looks, and they're all doing the bus stop, going forward, going back, going forward, going back, and then going to the right, and then going to the left, going to the right, to the left, stop, click, click, step forward, step back, move your heels, and then carry on again, right? I'm seeing this for the first time, and I'm like, damn. And what I noticed, and this is not the only precursor, or this is not the only foundation of freestyle, but it is important to breaking. I noticed, and I adopted this when I went back to California. I noticed that you would have these cats doing the bus stop. In California, it's called the LA Hustle. It's the same thing, it's exact same moves. Forward, back, side, side, boom, 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 little few steps, and then carry on again, repeat. What would happen, and I saw this, that when after the forward, back, side, 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 there was a moment of about 7-8 seconds when you would do step forward, step back, step forward, step back, step side, side, kick forward, and then start over again. During that little step that everyone did, there were rebels within the squad. There were rebels, dance rebels, who said, I'm not going to do that step that everyone does in place. I'm going to do a drop, spin, split, some kind of freestyle move, and then pop up right on time to join them as they take off to do the next loop.
So you're watching this all happening.
I'm seeing this. I'm watching this cat do it. He had. I remember he had like a keychain hanging out of his peg leg pants, like whole like 1930s look, and he does that instead of following everyone else and doing that step in place. He does drop, splits, blah blah blah, and then comes up. And I was like, oh shit, I got to do that. I want to do that. And I started, when I went back to California, back to all those discos in California where discos blowing up and everyone's doing the LA Hustle or the bus stop. I would, during the time of those 4, 5 to 8 seconds of those steps, in place steps, that was the difference. Everything else was in motion. These were the in place steps. I did my own thing. And then I stopped, and then the hustle, because the bus stop or the LA Hustle would only happen once or twice in a night, I started just doing my own freestyle moves.
How was the reaction of the people at that moment seeing you do that?
Well, the whole thing is you would have the whole dance floor doing this, right? So people like me, the show-offs, I was a show-off, and I was a good dancer. I was a show-off. So I wouldn't want to be in the middle of the formation. Nobody's going to see me do my freestyle moves. So I would always make sure I would be on the outside of the formation so you could see me do my drops and it was always about showing off.
Yeah.
Look at me. If hip hop's about anything, it's about those 3 words. Look at me. And so then, I got a little bit into California swing, got a little bit into Latin hustle with partner dancing because disco was a lot about that. But then I was always about doing like my own freestyle like James Brown. I dust off my high school moves, my James Brown drops and splits. I would do all kinds of things. And then what would happen is you notice somebody else doing it. And you're like, you start to tighten your thing up a little bit. You start to sharpen up a little bit. They start to sharpen their thing. And next thing you know, you're battling. This is like disco in the disco. Amazing. It's 1975, 74, 75, 76. It's not about hip hop. That hasn't happened yet. It's disco, straight up disco. And somebody else is challenging you. Or maybe they're not even challenging you. You just don't like the idea that they can do something like hotter than you. And you start doing it. And next thing you know, you start to notice each other. And next thing you know, you're battling with each other. And next thing you know, you're friends, but you're battling.
Yes.
And I'll tell you another thing that was really wild and blew my mind. A lot of people don't know this. Disco was a big part of disco also happened during the gay revolution. A lot of people were coming out and they were saying, I'm not hiding anymore and I'm gay and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of disco music catered to that scene, to that world. A lot of disco, and a lot of people say we didn't even call it disco. We called it R&B. A lot of it was being catered to in Black and brown neighborhoods. And a lot of times these would overlap and sometimes they wouldn't. But I can tell you something that's really fascinating. Back in those days, when I would come to New York in 75 and 76 and go to like Latin hustle clubs like Barney Google's on 86th Street, or go downtown to the Blue Angel or to the Hollywood, or to different clubs. I mean, I would just find my way all around. This would be what happened when hip hop came. There was a lot of uptightness between straight and gay. And I suppose AIDS had a lot to do with that. But before that, it wasn't that uptight. It wasn't that uptight. It was like, yo, man, it's cool. It's cool. You do your thing. You do your thing. But within the straight, urban, Black, and Latino world of New York City, the Black and Latino urban New York of the mid-70s, the height of disco, you would go to these clubs and you'd see dudes Latin hustle dancing together, doing the Latin hustle, spinning each other around. Straight dudes, not gay. Now, of course, you'd see girls doing that, right? You see that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But dudes, Black dudes, Latin hustling with each other, Latino dudes, Black and Latino, Latin hustling. Stranger comes up, yo, you want to dance and do Latin hustle? You think that that could even possibly happen? It was common.
Wow.
It was common. As a matter of fact, and it went on for like maybe a year or so, and then it kind of died out, and then it became like, well, that's weird. But when it was happening, nobody thought twice about it. As a matter of fact, I was out once rapping with Charlie Ahern, the director of Wild Style. And we were talking about the fact that, he's about 5 years older than me. So he comes from a different generation, but he comes from upstate New York. And he would come down to Manhattan and hang out in the late 70s and early 80s. And I remember we were kind of having a pissing contest as to who knew more about New York. He's from upstate and I'm from California. I said, I bet you I could tell you something that would blow your mind that you wouldn't even understand. And I told him about straight dudes Latin hustling with each other. And he was like, nah, man, that didn't happen. Because he's thinking, okay, I'm around in New York, and this is like the early 80s. And now by this time I'm telling the stories, it's like the mid 80s and later 80s and 90s even. And he's like, that's not possible. What he knew about hip hop and about the homophobia within hip hop, he was like, that's not possible. It couldn't have happened. I was like, dude, I'm telling you it happened. He's like, straight guys? I said, yeah, I'm straight. And I danced with the guys. I did it. I did it a couple of times. And he's like, it's not possible. I said, okay. We actually were on our way to a birthday party. It was actually Legs' birthday party, funny enough. And it was downtown.
Also, this is New Year's. New Year's around there.
Yeah, it must have been around New Year's.
Yeah, Legs' I believe his birthday is January 1st.
Is it really? Okay, so.
Yeah. Because I used to attend his party at Wetlands and Roseland. And
well, this was at Two Boots in the East Village. So it was an East Village party. And there, when I got in the door, there's Grandmaster Caz. Now I know Caz, and I love Caz. We're boys, and I know that he's like my age. He's around my age. As far as OGs, we're mad OGs because there's not a lot of people in hip hop who are older than me. Sorry, I mean I wasn't here.
Yeah, well, I'm 70s. Tripping out still your age, man. Like, because every brother that I've always spoken to, they're in their early 50s, mid 50s, and they might be reaching 60, but 65 and up, that's you know, you were around, like you
I've
were
seen
already
a
like
lot. I've
all
seen a
these
lot.
kids were young when you were
No, they
there.
weren't even born, half of them.
That's what I'm saying. So even like when they were 15, you were already in your 20s and you're
Right.
already doing your thing.
Exactly. Out of
Wow.
school,
Yes.
and we walk into the party and there's Kaz. Now I didn't know Kaz back in the day. I only knew him from, late 70s on. But I knew he was from New York. I said, Kaz, tell Charlie. And of course, Kaz and Charlie know each other. Kaz, Grandmaster Kaz and the Cold Crush Brothers are in Wild
Mhm.
Style. So tell Charlie that straight dudes at the clubs back in the disco days Latin hustle with each other. Tell him that happened. And he kind of like smiled and looked down kind of sheepishly and said, it's true. We did. And Charlie Aher was like, what? And he said, yeah. He said, because when we were doing the Latin hustles, there were certain Latin hustle styles that were so rough, you couldn't do it with a girl. You kind of had to do it with a dude. And sometimes you do it with a dude so that you would get good, so that you knew what you were doing when you did it with a chick. So it was
Wow.
practice. On one hand, it was practice. And on one hand, it was a style of hustling that was just rough. It was like this one thing. You know how styles come and go? It's
Mhm.
like, wow, we're doing this thing now. Now, okay, we did that last year. But there was a time that was a look, that was a thing.
That is
And a
freaking
lot of dudes,
amazing.
Maybe don't want to admit it, but it was so what? We did it. It was cool.
So how you started transitioning into like watching, meeting all these brothers and sisters there in the hip hop world, like you were already in tune with graffiti and just seeing everything all at once happen. Because I know after the disco era, according to all the brothers and sisters that I've spoken to, they tell me disco era started fading, then there was a new sound, and that's when like the Cool Herc and you were there, so it's good to know, because for the past 5 to 10 years, I've been hearing about the Latinos are guests in the black culture, and if now, oh, we came after, there was no Latin people in hip hop, and then sometimes like, oh,
Nah.
whites, they would just watch, and you hear that all the time, and it's like, man, like
I
you
was
were
there.
there,
I was
so you
there.
were
Let me
there.
tell
You
you.
could say all these things,
Yo, let
talk
me
to
tell you
me.
something. What I saw in 1974 at the Bethesda Fountain that I described to you, all 50 boom boxes all tuned to BLS. Sunday afternoon, people are getting down, doing all kinds of freestyle moves, doing the Latin hustle, doing it was a mix of New Yorkers. There was black, Latino, and white rocking out. There was even Asians down. And let me tell you, when I came back, that was my introduction to New York, was mid 70s. And I went back to San Francisco and to college and graduated. But every day I was in California, I said to myself, as soon as I can, I'm coming to New York, man. When I saw life in New York, when I saw the way people danced, when I saw the way they dressed, when I heard the way they spoke and the way that they moved and the way that they held themselves, it was like, for me, as this kid growing up as an army brat, living all over the world, I recognized that was the only place, that was the only city that I could live in that I could handle. That was enough for me. That was going to give me everything I wanted and more. I had to live in New York. LA was like small potatoes. San Francisco was small potatoes. After I was in New York, forget it. I could never go back anywhere else. So I bided my time, graduated, came here, and I've never looked back. But I can tell you that my introduction to New York was a lot like all my experiences. There was a little bit of a lot of it was, having been in the tubes and coming to New York and knowing people from my experience in the tubes. I became part of the downtown scene first. I was part of like this art scene first. Um, I had a friend who was an artist who I met in San Francisco, who's a British artist, who's only one of the few people that I knew in New York. His name was Stan Pescott. And he had a loft on Canal Street. And so when I first came to New York, I had this degree in economics from the University of San Francisco. Okay, what am I going to do with this degree in economics? I don't know. I had friends who were artists who had done the interior of Chemical Bank in Rockefeller Center. My friends, Michael Cotton, the same guy who did that black and white thing when I first
for
saw the tubes.
Yeah,
He's
tubes.
an airbrush artist. He and Prairie Prince, the drummer from the Tubes, were superb airbrush artists. They still are. They did this giant buildings inside this 30-foot high lobby of Chemical Bank, as if you had taken the roof off of the bank, and now you're seeing all the buildings. They painted it that way. And so they had connections with Chemical Bank. And so they introduced me to people at Chemical Bank, and they were like, okay, well, you can get a job working here with your degree in economics. My first job in New York was my first real job in New York was I was a junior banker, a Wall Street banker on Wall Street, which is like when people that know me go like, what, you worked at Wall Street? It's like, yeah, that was my first job.
I just heard an interview of you talking to a brother. It was audio, and it's on YouTube, and you're talking about you were in the Wall Street world.
Yeah.
And then from there, you moved on to, the hip hop scene. And it's so awesome.
Well, many things. Well, so I come to New York, and I'm living in a loft with friends of mine from California who had moved to New York before me. A couple named Denny and Janet Colmia, dear friends of mine. They got this loft on 1 Hudson Street. So on Hudson and Chambers. And that's my first place I'm living. It's like a loft. Wow, that's really cool.
How much was rent at that time?
I bet it was only a couple $100 a month. It would be $10,000 now.
Oh my God.
And remember, this is 1978. That was the year I moved here. The city is economically on its knees. You can find an apartment or a loft for like very little money. It was just an amazing
Which 77
time.
was the summer of Sam and the blackout, the big New York City blackout.
Right.
So you came the year after.
So I came the year after. I'm going to work at Chemical Bank in the daytime. I'm young, so I have the energy, right? Of I can stay up all night and go to work.
How old were you at that time?
I was 78. It would have been 25. Well, I would have been, I'm sorry. 75, I would have been 20. Right. So I was born in 55. So 75, I would have been 20. So I would have been 23. 1978, I would have been 23. Just graduated from school, 23 years old, working this trainee banker job on Wall Street during the day. And at night, I'm going out to Max's Kansas City and CBGB's and like digging the whole downtown art scene. And this friend of mine, Stan Pescott, this English artist, who had actually gone to school with Malcolm McLaren and all these different, back in London in the 60s. He's the only person I really know in New York, and he's got a loft on Canal Street. And so I'm hanging out with him on the weekends, and I see this. Let me back up a little bit. So I'm living at 1 Hudson Street. I've got this job on Wall Street, and I'm going out, like I said, to CBGB's and Max's Kansas City at night. And what's interesting is Joey Ramone, the lead singer of the Ramones, lives in my building. So when I would wake up like at 7 in the morning and get into the elevator at 8 in the morning to go to the trains to get down to Wall Street, which wasn't that far away, in would be coming Joey Ramone with 2 girls on each arm. And he's coming home from the party, and I'm just going to work. And I'm like, wow, this is bugged. This is Joey Ramone lives in my building. And Philippe Petit, who walked across the World Trade Centers on a tightrope.
Yes.
He lived in my building as well. So I'm like moving to New York, and even the building I live in have superstars in it. And everywhere I go, I see like famous people. And New York just turned me out. It was just the most amazing experience to move to New York at that time. So now I'm getting on the subway to go to work, really only a couple of stops away because, I'm already in the Tribeca, and these trains would roll in. And this is my first time seeing top to bottom, full car, full train, graffiti burners, like pieces. And I'm this California kid. I've only been in the city for maybe 6 months at this point. And these trains come rolling in, and I'm looking at other people on the platform going like, are you seeing this? Like, what is this? Like, I couldn't understand as a California kid how what was obviously vandalism done beautifully, how they would get away with it. Why was this on this train? Who gave them permission? That none of this makes sense. This is part of the gangsterism of New York. This Gothic goblin, we do what we want. Ethic, style, mentality that you feel in New York that so draws artists from around the world to live here. This idea of like, I'm a New Yorker, and if I want to like paint the whole train, covering up the windows, you can't even see out the windows, then I'm going to do it. And if I have to go to jail, then I'll go to jail doing it. And it was that aesthetic, that style, that commitment to this idea of look at me that made New York at that time the center of the world, and everybody around the world wanted to be there.
Did you feel like it was an artistic revolution happening at that moment?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And you would see things like that. And then at the same time, I remember walking down 42nd Street and seeing these tourists looking up at all the buildings, and homie runs up and digs his hand into the dad's pockets and rips all of his money out and runs. And I'm like, and people are going like, oh my God. And this tourist, probably from the Midwest, right? Just got robbed, just got mugged in broad daylight, had his whole pocket picked by a brother who just runs off. And I'm watching this, and all the New Yorkers just like, yeah, well, you just got vicked, too bad. And the tourists are like, oh my God, what do we do? And I'm just like, wow, man, this city's wild. Kids walking with giant boom boxes as big as suitcases, blasting. I'm just thinking, I got to live here. This is the place to be. This is like, these people are like wild.
Now, did you see street performers at that time too, or no?
Yeah, there were like street performers, but the whole city was one giant street performance. The whole city was a street performance.
Oh, wow.
I was, during this time, my first year in New York, I'm walking up Fifth Avenue at around 20th Street. And I'm looking up at the Empire State Building, which is about 15 blocks north from where I am, to my left. And I'm looking up at the Empire State Building, and I'm walking along up Fifth Avenue, and I'm stepping off the curb, and I don't realize that I'm just about to run into this little old man who's probably like 5 feet tall. And I'm just about to run into him, and I hear him say, and he looks like Muggsy from the Muggsies, from the Dead End Kids. He's got a fedora turned up, a big old long overcoat. It's summertime. He's got a long overcoat. And you know what he says to me? He says, out the way, Puerto Rico. He's this old Irish guy. He's like this old Irish guy from the hood, right? From one of these dead end kids from the 1930s.
He saw you light skinned, and he said, out the way, Puerto Rico.
And I'm like, I'm the whole island of Puerto Rico to this guy. Out the way, Puerto Rico. And when he said that to me, I was like, oh, thank you for saying that to me. I just felt so good to be living in New York, walking up Fifth Avenue, looking at the Empire State Building, almost running into some guy who clearly belonged in New York in the 1930s. You'd see in these movies, the Dead End Kids.
Yes.
And I was just like, man, I'm in New York now.
So he gave you the official recognition of you're a New Yorker.
Kind of. Yeah.
And that was a good feeling right there. You're like, man, I'm part of this.
I'm part of this. I almost ran into him, but even if I ran into him, I would have been part of it. It was out the way, Puerto Rico. And I was like, yeah, to the point that I'm telling you this story. I never forgot. I tell all of my friends know this story.
That's amazing.
And so, I'm working at Wall Street, in the daytime, and I'm going out at night. I'm going out to the Mud Club. I'm going to CBGB's. I'm going to the Ocean Club. I'm going to all these different spots. And after a while, it's like getting the whole Wall Street thing is getting old. And I'm starting to see who my contemporaries are. And okay, so my friend Stan Pescott, the English artist I was telling you about, who had the loft on Canal Street.
Yes.
I'm hanging out at his place on the weekends, smoking joints and talking art and trying to keep my Tubes art voice and identity alive by hanging out with this artist in an artist loft, helping him with a lot of his projects. And one day, and we're smoking joints and like making art. And one day I'm looking in the Village Voice, and there's this little blurb, and it says, and it's an interview of this guy named Fab Five Freddy, who is the official media spokesperson of the Fabulous Five. That's why his name was Fab Five Freddy.
Yep.
And in this little blurb, Fabulous Five Freddy says, we, the Fabulous Five, will come to your place of business, or we'll come to your home, and we will do giant burners. We charge by the square foot. Now, this is like 1979, 78.
Wow.
No, it's 1978, the winter, December 78, when this article came out. And he had a phone number. And I'd already been seeing these burners on trains, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really wild, man. And this guy is like, now looking back, how prescient were they to have already been thinking in 1978, we're going to do this as a business.
Yeah, they're advertising.
Or your home. They're advertising. So I called the number up right there in Stan Pescott's loft. I called the number up, and I get Freddy on the phone. I'm like, yo, man, what's up? And I just saw, I read this thing, and come hang out with me and Stan Pescott. So now Freddy comes hanging out on the weekends. I'm this Wall Street orphan. Freddy's this cat representing these graffiti artists. He's about 4 or 5 years younger than me. I'm about 10 years younger than Stan Pescott. We're hanging out, smoking joints, and coming up with ideas. And we come up with this idea of, let's have a party for the Fabulous Five. Of course, the most famous member of the Fabulous Five is Lee Quinones.
Yes.
But he's not from uptown, by the way. He's from Lower East Side, where I am right now, coming to you from the LES.
Nice.
There's Lee Quinones, Fab Five Freddy, a guy named Doc, another guy named Slave, and another guy named Mono. That was the Fabulous Five. We decide we're going to have a party for them in Stan Pescott's loft downtown. And it was going to be a couple of months later. It ended up being on April 29th, 1979. Now, this is super important because what we did, we had all the Fabulous Five do giant graffiti burners on thick, clear plastic, pieces of clear plastic that you would see in meatpacking districts, you know, like to keep the cold in and out. So they did these giant graffiti burners on these thick pieces of plastic. We hung them up. Stan Pescott's loft was a good 20 feet high. It was really good height. We hung them up and invited the whole downtown scene. What's interesting and important and historic about that party, the Canal Zone party, and that night, April 29th, 1979, was it was the first time, the first event, we didn't know it at the time, but it was the first event in which uptown, and I say that in quotation marks because Lee Quinones was not uptown, but uptown hip-hop culture wasn't called hip-hop at that time, but it would be the first time that uptown hip-hop culture, in the guise of graffiti or aerosol art, aerosol art, would rub shoulders with the downtown post-punk, new wave, no wave art scene. First time that those two cultures rubbed shoulders together was April 29th, 1979. My party, Fab Five Freddy's party, Stan Pescott's party, called the Canal Zone party.
The Canal Zone
party. Super important because I will tell you later how the downtown art scene was instrumental in bringing hip hop to the world. All right, so put a pin in that for a moment. So now now it's April 29th, 1979. We've got all the stuff up. The party's jumping. And it's for the most part downtown artists, you know, painters, sculptors, writers, actors coming to our party that we knew. Always looking for a party. There was no internet. We found a way to let everyone know. People just knew. Everyone shows up. But before the party opens, as we're hanging everything up, this young, black, charismatic, good-looking, confident, aggressive young man comes in and says, I want to be down too. I want to have my art in this too. Didn't know who he was. But he was so charismatic, we didn't even ask. We said, okay. So we put up a big sheet of gray photo paper, 9 by 12 foot piece of photo paper, gave him a can of red spray paint. Go. He writes, which of the following are omnipresent? He writes, which of the following are omnipresent? A, Lee Harvey Oswald, the man who assassinated John F. Kennedy. B, the Coca-Cola logo. C, General Mallory. General Mallory, for those who don't know, is the person who ordered the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. A, B, C, or D, Samo. Oh, snap. It's Samo.
Oh.
It was Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Oh, wow.
Now, of course, it would take a few years later for me to find out that Samo was not just Basquiat. It was Jean-Michel Basquiat and Al Diaz, his Puerto Rican homeboy from Brooklyn. They were both from Brooklyn. So, or maybe Al Diaz was from down here in Lower East Side. But anyway, they went to school together at School is Art in Brooklyn. So he, when in the act of writing it, it dawns on me, because I'm videotaping all this, that's Samo. Now I did know about Samo, and I'd seen the Samo tags and poems all over downtown East Village, Tribeca, Soho, but I never knew who it was. And as he's writing it, I'm like, oh my God, it's him. Moments later, I'm through the party interviewing people, and I'm doing this bugged out thing, stupid California thing. I'm Dadaist. I'm asking people a question and then putting the mic in their face, and then before they can answer, I'm pulling it out again, and I'm asking them another question, and I'm like bugging. And there's this guy doing a videoing me interviewing people. So now I'm doing that with Basquiat. I'm interviewing Jean-Michel Basquiat. Never spoke to him before. This is the first time I'm speaking to him, was on camera at the party. It's like a party, multimedia party. People are dancing, There's music. And I'm doing that to him. And when he realizes that I'm not going to let him answer, he does something that other friends of Basquiat, we call each other FOBs, said, yeah, he did that to me too. Jean did this thing in which when he tried to answer, when he realized I wasn't going to let him answer, he just did this most amazing, magical, superhuman act. He all of a sudden dropped all judgment and emotion and any kind of expression from his face and turned into a stone statue looking at me. And in the act of doing that, he turned into a mirror, and I'm seeing myself acting the fool. And I start stammering and stuttering, blah, 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 and happily the thing, in my mind, it was a big disaster. It wasn't really. I've seen the footage. And the interview comes to a close. 20 minutes later, I see him kind of standing alone, and I go up to him. I say, hey, man, sorry about that. I was just goofing. He goes, no, that's okay. You want to start a band? And I was like, yeah. And we started Gray that moment. We left the party and started like talking about what the kind of music we were going to make and everything. And so my downtown foot planted deeply and solidly in the downtown world, where maybe my left foot is uptown, my right foot is downtown, that is starting to blossom and grow. We create this no wave, avant-garde, noise, experimental electronic band You have to understand at this time, bands, you had to be in a band. That's how you got chicks, man. That's how you got the girls, man. Didn't matter whether you were a painter or an actor or a filmmaker or a musician, whatever you did, you had to be in a band because that's how you got laid. And Jean wanted to be in this band called the Lounge Lizards, John Lurie's Lounge Lizards. And you know, he didn't know how to play any instrument, but he looked great. And they were like, "No, I mean, you don't know how to play any instrument. You can't be in our band." And so when Jean and I decided to start our band, Gray, we didn't call it Gray right away, but that was the band. We decided that we were going to be an anti-band, that we would create sound and music using conventional instruments, but playing them in unconventional ways. For example, one song I had a microphone plugged into an amplifier and high reverb, taped down on the head of a snare drum, and I'm pulling masking tape off the drum head. So it would go like, and that was the percussion for the song. And Jean would have a guitar and he would play the music sitting on the floor. He didn't even stand up, he would sit on the floor. And he made all the strings like super loose. And he had a metal file and he would run the file along the strings going blink, 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 blink. And we would just look and search through our ears, through sounds, tearing paper, breaking things, finding the insides of a piano and using that as an instrument, and just doing really crazy things with sound. And we did a great job at it. And people all you have to do is, again, here's an opportunity for your listeners to go on YouTube and look for the Gray album, Shades of, and just listen to that.
Well, I would like to show you some of this right here. Look.
Oh, snap. You can hear some of the sound right now.
Yes, I could play it. Which is so amazing. I saw this and I was like, man, Michael's a genius.
Well, now this is Gray in 2010, so this is obviously many, many years later.
But it gives the audience at least a taste of the Gray.
A bit, yeah. Yeah, maybe let it play and see what happens. That's me with my back to you. That was a little teaser of our.
That's such a tease. But hey, for those that just watch that, like he said, go on YouTube, look for it. But I've seen a couple of the shows that I looked up, and it was so amazing. I was like, man, this is so cool. And it's like an experimental artistic vibe that you were giving before even Stomp, because Stomp had all these crazy instrument stuff, but you were doing it with electronics and different synthesizers and all these weird things, right?
I mean, and of course there are people who did it before us. I mean, there are people like artists like John Cage from the 1940s and 50s who started like playing with the idea of finding kitchen appliances like an egg beater and turning it into an instrument using the right, I mean, there have been people before us who played with tape loops and whatnot. But when Gray came out, we were a fresh new approach to this idea of sound and noise and electronics and sampling and all that back in 79 and 80. And so this is going on in my life with Basquiat, who's very much about the downtown fine art, avant-garde, not at all about anything hip-hop. To the degree that he's a graffiti artist, which he was technically, he was a graffiti artist in terms that he wrote poems and sayings, bars on the side of buildings, not colorful letters, or names. But he wrote his name, and he's another New York kid. And even from the very beginning of me coming to New York in '78, I always had this like I worship the ground of the native New Yorkers, of you guys. I just so admired the kind of lives, the struggle that you lived as New Yorkers, and the courage you had, and the way that you expressed yourselves in a way that the people around the world look up to you and say, I want to be like that. I want to have that kind of heart. I want to have that kind of like chutzpah, that kind of balls, man, to like come out and dance like that, to make music like that, to make art like that, to speak up like that. Nobody in the world does it like New Yorkers. Nobody. I'm not a native, man. I'm a New Yorker, but I wasn't born and raised here. So I always have mad love and mad props and mad respect and flowers for like the natives, man, because you guys are too much.
Yeah, there's always a wild thing going on. And it's like from one trend to another. By the time you create something, New York is already doing something else. That's what I've always noticed about New York.
But a lot of what makes New York great is all the different kinds of people who are here, and all the great artists who came from other places, like myself, like the Jackson Pollocks and the John Cages and the Yoko Onos, and the people who came here throughout the last 150 years. New York has always been a mecca for artists, for fine artists, for painters, for
it's
sculptors,
definitely a melting pot for sure.
for dancers, for ballet, for modern dance, for theater. It's always been a mecca for that. And the fact that New York has always been a mecca for world culture and a platform for world culture for kids like you who were born and raised here, who went to school with kids who maybe whose parents were fine artists and had showed works in galleries, who maybe worked at hair salons where Twiggy would come in the 60s and get her hair done. You know, you guys grew up in this melting pot of culture, and it gave you an advantage that, believe me, is a huge part of why hip hop happened in New York and not Chicago and not Los Angeles and not Houston.
And you were there to witness that. And I would like to go into you going into watching the first B-boy throw down that you were like, whoa, or you already mentioned the graffiti. So it already gave you the hieroglyphics of the beginning of hip-hop.
That was the beginning for me, was the hieroglyphics,
so the
which makes sense.
Yes. So now what about rappers? Do you already hear rap playing back then at that time? Because I know
sure.
Your Sugar Hill Gang was going on.
Sugar Hill came out in '79
and all that.
But you could tell there was a lot of underground stuff, and you could tell that Sugar Hill was a little, in the corny tip and wasn't the real deal. You could tell that there was something else going on. But for me, hip hop, the first introduction was the visuals, the graffiti, and the second and of course the music and all. But the second introduction was the dance. So you have to understand. So Jean-Michel Basquiat and I start Gray, and Vincent Gallo is in the band, Wayne Clifford, my bandmate now, Nicholas Taylor. We are still Gray. We still make Gray. And he was the original member.
I would love to go and see one of your shows whenever you do that.
We'll have a listening party for our album in the end of the summer, so I'll make sure you come.
Oh, that would be awesome.
But, Gray lasted for like about a year and a half. And then Basquiat blows up as a painter, right? I mean, he becomes world famous from the PS1 show. And he has to leave the band because he has to focus on making art. And I'm already like playing with film and playing with interesting in-camera effects and Super 8 film and doing weird things with it. Because of Basquiat's influence in Gray, we're already doing weird things with sound and music. I want to now take this to the visual, to film, and push the camera and push myself in terms of frames and in terms of what's going on in the frame, in terms of speed of the frame, in terms of special effects. I want to push the envelope the way we were pushing the envelope with sound.
Mm-hmm.
So, and now I don't have a band anymore. It's just me. And so I do this film called Vincent Gallo as Flying Christ. And it's this short film of Vincent Gallo walking towards my camera. I had it on a tripod, a Super 8. He's walking towards the camera, and he jumps in the air, and I turn the camera off. Then I have him back up and jump in the air again, but a little closer to me. And I film him only while he's in the air. And then I turn the camera off. When he's coming down, I quickly turn the camera off. I'm only pulling the trigger for that split second that he's in the air. So what happens is the film, he's walking towards you, he jumps in the air and he just pixelates through the air, flies over the camera.
And you've been into film for a while already doing this?
Yeah,
like
doing this doing this wild stuff.
Because I know you did the kind of like comedic / short film Money Dog.
Yeah. Money Dog.
Do you mind if I show a little clip of that? Because that was
Sure.
interesting, man.
I don't know if it's comedic.
Get 'em,
but-
I
You
want
want a
one.
blue nose? You want a red nose?
I want a pretty one that gets, that's muscular,
Yeah,
that look nice, that's gonna grow up
I
nice.
tell you what, man, you got the money, everything be good for you, man.
Yo, I want one of those. Take my number, call me
All right,
up.
man. So 200, we gonna drink and get blunted, all
All
right?
right, that's what it is
All
right
right,
there. All right,
all
man.
right,
Good looking, my
peace,
man.
man.
All right.
That's so official, man. So you filmed this too as well?
Yeah, I directed this film. And these are my boys, Tim Single and On, who were in a lot of the films that I did. And this is a story about these kids that steal a pit bull puppy from a guy who breeds them to fight them. And the drama is one wants him as a fighter and the other one wants it as a pet. And the conflict is what
You
the
probably
film is
wonder why
about.
we running, huh?
This is in the Bronx.
Yes. And what were you filming with?
16 millimeter.
Oh, 60 millimeter. I see.
I bet
Yeah,
y'all
you
probably
already
think
got the
we done
slow
stole
motion
the
down
purse or
packed.
something.
How long did it take you to do the whole film?
Well, so this film was my thesis film when I went to film school at NYU. And
Some people sell drugs.
so I shot it all around
Some people
1987, 88. Yeah, this is a wild shot here, right here.
We steal dogs.
That's a
Pit
nice
bulls
shot
are
right
special.
there.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
We want killers. We get you whatever you want.
So these are my kids. These are my boys, man. These are my good friends.
Man, I had that same coat that the guy has right there with the colors.
Oh yeah.
You know, when they
So
say
I shot it in 87, but you know what?
Right up in
The
your
sad
face.
thing was I got so busy with so many other things that it took me 20 years to finally finish the film.
Wow.
I ended up finishing that film. This is a short film. It's like about 15 minutes long. I ended up finishing it in like 2000 and I don't know, 2012 or 13 or something. Took me forever to get it done, but I finally got it done. It has a hip hop flavor. But so anyway, I was going back to when Gray broke up, and I'm making films. I'm making all these art films. I find out about these kids called breakers who spin on their heads. And as I said before, I'd already made this film with Vincent Gallo where he's flying through the air.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to make a film with these kids who spin on their heads because it's similar to what I'm playing with.
And you haven't seen it yet. You just heard about it.
Haven't seen it. So I find out, this would have been 1981, that there is this event at a place called Common Ground in the Soho, put on by Henry Chalfant, who is one of the great pioneers of bringing hip hop downtown, if not the ground zero. Henry Chalfant. He made Style Wars. He made all these different documentaries. He's the one who put together the battle between Rocksteady and Dynamic at Lincoln Center. He managed Rocksteady crew. I mean, Henry Chalfant, he's an incredible pioneer. He took so many photographs of graffiti trades, etc., along with Martha Cooper, who's my dear friend, of course. So Henry Chalfant is putting on a party called Graffiti Rock at Common Ground. And I've got my Super 8 camera and I'm ready to, because I'm thinking there's going to be graffiti. I know that there's going to be graffiti, breakdancers there because I read this in the Village Voice.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm showing up with my camera ready to film some kid spinning on his head, just to be one of many things that I'm doing with film, that with human beings, like human claymation, doing weird things. I get there. Turns out the event didn't happen. The Ball Busters had shown up and broke up the whole party, and the whole thing was canceled.
Oh
And
man.
I'm like going, wow, that's a drag. And I see these Puerto Rican kids hanging out on the corner. They're like in their 15, 16, 17. And I'm guessing they must be break dancers, right? So I go up to them and, excuse me, are you guys break dancers? And like, yeah, we're break dancers. I was like, wow, can you do head spins? Or can you spin on your head? And they were like, yeah. Well, can you show me? I want to film it. It's like, we're not going to do it right here on the concrete, And I said, well, who are you? We're IBM, Incredible Break Masters.
Oh,
okay. So
can you remember the characters?
There was Eddie, Chino, the only two I can remember. Eddie and Chino. If
and that's like Eddie, Chino, Brian, Sammy, all of them, like Incredible Breakers.
IBM.
Wow. So they went as Incredible Breaker Masters?
Incredible Break Masters. IBM.
Wow.
So I'm chatting them up and I'm saying, listen, I just want to I'm working on this film. I was working on Catch a Beat, the very first hip hop film, actually, short film. And I'm shooting I want to shoot breakers. And I didn't realize I was making that film at the time, but that was the beginnings of it. And I want to just get this, I want to see people doing these athletic, crazy gyroscopic moves. And so they agreed to let me film them. And I get to know them. I get their numbers. I contact their parents, make sure that they know what I'm doing. I didn't want to do anything without parents knowing. And I'm bringing them to the Mud Club and filming them. When actually the Tubes, my old band, when they came and performed in New York in 1981, many years after I was in the Tubes, I actually was able to get IBM to open up and dance for them during one of their songs.
You recorded that?
I didn't record it. No, I wish I had recorded.
Oh my God, that would have been
IBM
classic.
danced for the Tubes at the Palladium on 14th
So these are the
Street.
first B-boys that you actually meet, Incredible Break
IBM. And through them,
wow.
I meet Rocksteady. Through them, I meet Rocksteady.
And you mentioned Eddie. Eddie passed away about 10 years ago or 15.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yes, Eddie passed. And
But
those
Chino's
are like
still
my
alive,
family.
right?
Yeah, Chino and Brian, they're the brothers, and Sammy, they're still alive. Because it was Chino, Brian, Sammy, and Eddie. Eddie passed, I believe, more than 10 years ago. And those are like my fam. Like I kind of grew up with them in my breaking career in the early 90s because I'm like close brothers of the nephew called Incredible Josh, which I don't know if you ever heard of him, but Incredible Josh is like their protege, like their nephew. And he became one of the first B-boy to be part of Cirque du Soleil in Orlando, Florida. He was one of the first B-boys to be in Cirque du Soleil. Incredible Breakers. When I started breaking, I was down with this little crew because, like the first year breaking, we created this crew called Living on Concrete. And it was like in Dykeman and in Washington Heights and Wood. It was 4 or 5 of us. And we were like, yeah, we're living on concrete. Around that time, there wasn't that many crews because remember, breaking started coming back. Right. And the only crews that I heard of course, New York City Breakers because of Beach Street and Rocksteady crew. I heard of Dynamic Rockers. And then my generation of B-boy crews was a crew called Ready to Rock, RTR, and my crew Living on Concrete. And we would attend Bombs 5 event called The Spot. I don't know if you ever attended that, but he had like a gallery thing. And that was like my first time being around like galleries and hip hop and like just, there was something bigger than what I was trying to do. Right. And I met Forrest, B-boy Burn from Brooklyn. He was down Rocksteady crew at that time with Forrest as well. So I met all these brothers. But then I ran into, and through Forrest, Quickstep Rockefeller, they introduced me to Incredible Breakers in 95. And they said, hey, this is Chino Brian, this is Eddie, this is Sammy. They were the best in the 80s, this and that. They were also floor masters. They're telling me all these stories. So I started going to Kingsbridge in the Bronx to visit them all the time, to train with them. And I kind of got down with Incredible Breakers. So to this day, they're my family. So I was always like Incredible Breakers slash New York City Breakers, because I will do shows with New York City Breakers. And that's basically the generation of New York City Breakers, 95 through 2003, under Speedy, London, Mighty Mike, Alien S. It's crazy because the original members weren't even rocking in the shows, like Chino, Paxter, Little Lep. I knew them, and it's just so amazing that you're mentioning Incredible Breakers. And I want you to carry on to that story, because I've never heard this story in my life. I know you did the graffiti rock, and I wanted to show a little bit of this right here. Which, wow, man, it's amazing. How old were you at that time?
I would have been, so that would have been 84. So I would have been like 28, 29 years old.
Which, wow, this was epic. How many times you guys shot this? Just one time?
Just one. There was only one episode.
No, but I'm saying, how many times you filmed this? Like, to do this? Was it one take?
Oh, no, one take. Yeah.
Wow. These guys. And how you came up with the New York City Breakers as we watched it at the same time?
Well, you know, it's a kind of a long story. It goes, it's easier to tell in a linear way, but you know, Phase 2, Phase 2, who's a hip hop pioneer in every respect, just about.
Yes.
As an MC, as a writer, as a dancer, as a b-boy. He and I were friends, and he was a big influence on me, and as an ambassador to the Bronx, what was going on uptown in the Bronx. There's action there.
Yeah.
And I kind of have to go back to the grill and before that with Malcolm McLaren and all that to line that up. But the idea of an all-star crew that wasn't a neighborhood crew, that wasn't just made up of buddies and friends, in which I would go around the city rating the best of the crews and the best dancers and crews and like pull them out of that crew and bring them into our crew. That was a new idea. That's a New York City Breakers. It's an all-star team. And that idea was both Phase 2 and my idea. And the name of the New York City Breakers, Phase 2, that he named us that. He named us the New York City Breakers.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Now, I know that you met the Rocksteady crew, but you noticed that New York City Breaker has spin moves.
Yeah.
In one of the interviews, you were talking about that. What was it that caught your eye? Was it exactly the acrobatic spin moves that New York City Breakers had that kind of made you want to manage them and take them to the next level?
Well, I kind of feel like I have to. Okay, going back to my friend Stan Pescott, the English artist on Canal Street, right?
Mm-hmm.
He went to school with Malcolm McLaren.
Oh.
In 1980, after our first Canal Zone party in 79, Stan Pescott continued having these parties in 1980 and 81. And in 1980, by 1981, I had already been managing and filming Incredible Breakmasters, was putting together my film, Catch a Beat. I was unofficially managing or even agenting, really, a Rocksteady crew. I was interviewing and bringing downtown DJ Africa Bambaataa and the Zulu Nation to perform in different places. So I was heavily into the game of the downtown kids who were bringing hip hop artists from uptown, downtown. And really, those people were Fab Five Freddy, who was really the person who introduced me to hip hop culture, myself, Martha Cooper, Charlie Ahern, and Henry Chalfant. We were those downtowners bringing the culture downtown. So my friend Stan Pescott, the English artist, says, Michael, Malcolm McLaren is going to come to one of the Canal Zone parties. You got to come. Because he knew that I knew that introducing what we were doing, this hip hop movement, it wasn't called hip hop, to someone like Malcolm McLaren, who was world famous in bringing subcultures to the world, like what he did with punk rock, which, by the way, started in New York. And he brought New York artists like the Ramones, who I discussed before, and the New York Dolls and television and bands like that to London, turned them out in London. And from that was created the Clash and the Sex Pistols. So don't get it twisted. It started in New York. But my friend Stan Pescott was friends with Malcolm McLaren, tells me to come to the party. Malcolm's going to be here. I get there. I'm like, this is great. Something good's going to come from me meeting Malcolm McLaren, because he's such a powerful culture maven, and he understands subculture. He understands underground culture. Something good's going to come of this. I go to the party. Stan Pescott introduces me to Malcolm. Malcolm basically says, well, what is this thing that you do? I don't understand. What is this movement? There was no name. It wasn't like I could say, yeah, well, it's called hip hop. We just called it uptown culture, uptown, park jam culture. It was like it had all kinds of names. And he said, well, I'm interested. And I said, well, listen, and he said, I'd like to see some of this. I'm like, okay, this is great. This is great. Okay. I stepped away and got on the phone and called Bambaataa. I'd already been interviewing him for this article for the East Village Eye. I said, Bam, are you doing any park jams in the next couple of days? Malcolm was only in town for a couple of days. He said, yeah, I'm doing something this Friday. Perfect. So I went back to Malcolm at the party. I said, what are you doing Friday night? Nothing? Okay. I'm going to take you up to a park jam in the Bronx, at Bronx River.
Ooh.
And he's like, yeah, cool, great. Keep in mind, he was in town to promote this new romantic band called Bow Wow Wow, who were going to be playing in September of 81 at the Ritz on East 11th Street downtown. Okay. That's what he was in town for at that time. This was like June or July. And he's like, cool. So I said, okay, I'm going to pick you up on Friday around 6 or 7 o'clock. It was the summertime. The sun was still out. And I get to his hotel, and he's there with Rory Johnston, who was an executive, A&R executive at RCA Records. RCA Records put out all of Bow Wow Wow's music. And Malcolm was their manager. And so I get to the hotel room, and they're dressed like pirates of the Penzance on acid. I mean, it was like that Boy George look. And I was like, oh, no, I can't take them up to the Bronx dressed like this, man. We're going to get vicked. Like, I'm wearing like cut off jeans and, low cut Keds and a nylon t-shirt with a nylon tank top, little gold chain, sailor cap pulled down. I mean, I'm dressed, ghetto camouflage. Like, I can blend in, I'm not going to get in trouble. I can I fit in. These guys are dressed to the hilt like pirates in with like big bow pantaloon pants and crazy red hair and
what year is this?
It's like 1981. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how am I going to bring these guys up to the Bronx with them dressed like this? We're going to get victimized, no doubt. But I also know that I have to bring them up there because something historic is going to happen. Because this is the guy who brought the Sex Pistols to the world, right?
Yes,
Johnny Rotten, he invented these kids. So I'm thinking something good's going to come of this. And I also knew the English attitude towards the world. They think they're superior to everybody. They have this colonial, condescending attitude. If I had said to him, man, you can't dress like this, it's going to be dangerous, he would have said, oh, don't you worry your pretty little head. We English have took over half the world, and they did with their attitude.
Yes.
They took over a quarter of the world for 200 years. So don't you worry your pretty little head. I'll be fine. I didn't even say anything. I just said, forget it. I'm not going to say anything to them. I'm not going to tell him to change his look, his gear.
Yeah.
That's his look. Pirates on acid, Boy George. I mean, okay, fine. So we can't get a cab. No cab will go to the Bronx. Finally, I find this woman, Puerto Rican woman who has a gypsy cab, who said, I live right near the Bronx River. I'll take you up there, and then that'll be the end of my shift. Great. We get up there, and now it's nighttime. And we get to the block with Bronx River, because Bronx River Projects takes up about 5 city blocks.
Yes.
And all the street lights around where this woman dropped us off had been shot out. There's no street lights. It's like pitch black. and all you can hear is the beats of the music that Bambaataa or perhaps Jazzy J or Red Alert is playing further in the block, in the center of all of the projects buildings, because it's a shorter building, which is a community center, and they're performing outside there, and you can hear the beats. It's like out of a Joseph Conrad novel, Heart of Darkness. And it's like you're in the deepest jungle of the Congo, and you can hear the drums, but you can't see anything because it's dark. And there's hardly anybody out walking around. I'm like so happy because everybody's at the party, at the park jam. So I'm like, okay, everybody stay close to me. Rory, Malcolm, stay close to me. Just don't go anywhere, because they have no idea what the Bronx is. They have no idea. And they're dressed like clowns. I mean, literally. So I'm like, come the pirate clowns. So I'm just stay close to me, stay close to me. And we get closer and closer. And then we get to where the buildings part. And there in front of us is a sea of about 1,000 middle school, mostly boys, some girls, Black and Puerto Rican, some white kids. There's a lot of white kids that lived up in Bronx River, a lot of poor white people that live up there. And they're wilding out to the music. They're dancing. People are yelling out of the windows, turn that music off, and throwing bottles down, glasses breaking. A fight breaks out. You know how middle school kids are. Fight breaks out, and all of them go run like lemmings to see that fight. Then another fight breaks out, and they all run to see that fight. And I'm looking over in the corner of my eye, Malcolm McLaren, and he and Rory are just like, oh shit, where are we? And I'm like, yeah, you think you're so bad? You think you're so bad? You're in the boogie down, baby. Now it was like the inner circle of Dante's Inferno. It was madness. I said, just come with me, come with me. We got to get it behind the rope where Bambaataa's turn system is set up. And they're like, man, we got to get out of here. We got to we're now been spotted. We can't leave. There's no going away.
Yeah,
everybody's seen us now.
Yeah,
we'll be like done. So now we're behind the ropes and we're behind turntables. I introduced Malcolm McLaren to Bambaataa and Jazzy J, and I said, Bam, man, get Jazzy on the turntables. You know, just playing records ain't gonna make it. We're gonna lose them. And he goes, okay, we'll put Jazzy on the next record. So he finishes that record, and Jazzy gets on the turntables. He starts scratching. What we now know is turntablism. It's like we call. I said, see, Malcolm, see what he's doing? That's special mix DJing. See the kid over there? That's breakdancing. See it over there? That's like graffiti. And see what Ike C on the mic is doing? That's like rapping. This is the thing I was telling you about back in Manhattan. And he goes, okay, this is cool. He said, let's get out of here, but I got an idea. So true to what I was saying about the challenge of where we were, Bambaataa assigns 3 giant Zulu bodyguards to take us to a cab and send us downtown. On the way downtown, going down the west side, I'll never forget, going down the West Side Highway, Malcolm McLaren says to me, Michael, I want you to put together a show, a review of all these things you showed me to open up for Bow Wow Wow in September when we perform at the Ritz. And I was like, yes, I knew it. I knew it. Now, keep in mind, at this stage in 81, Henry Chalfant did the Graffiti Rock at Common Ground, which never came off, but it was going to have all the elements in it. Had Rocksteady Crew was there. Fab Five Freddy was on the mic there. Ram LZ was on the mic. I don't know who's turntabling. I think they had a boombox, so it may not have been turntablism, but it had basically the elements of hip hop. It didn't come off. It didn't happen. Nobody saw it. For years in the past, at Bronx clubs like Stardust Ballroom or Gun Hill Road Club, there had been hip hop DJs, or what we would now consider hip hop DJs. There had been like rap performances years before. But there'd never been, before that gig, Tuesday, September 14th, I believe, 1981, at the Ritz downtown on East 11th Street, was the first time all the elements of hip hop performed in concert for a paying audience. And it was because of this English dude, Malcolm McLaren. And all the work that I'd been doing and Freddie been doing and all that had built up that over the
Now
last
that's
year and a
before
half.
Buffalo Gals and all that.
Oh yeah, no, of course it was before. That was the first time he had ever seen it.
That's how he got inspired to do all that.
So
stuff.
peep it. So peep this.
Wow.
So it's mid-September at the Ritz. Who's on stage? My review, my hip hop review. Rocksteady crew, who I'd been unofficially managing at that time, helping Henry Chalfant out. On the mic, Ike C. On the turntables, Jazzy J, Bambaataa. I'm not sure if Red Alert was there. I thought that doing graffiti was Brim, because Brim did a lot of stuff with Zulu Nation, but it might have been somebody else. And then my film was finally finished, Catch a Beat. So all the elements were on stage, not in the Bronx.
Wow.
In downtown Manhattan was the first time that all the elements of hip hop was performed in front of an audience.
Was there a lot of cameras around that time? Was there a lot of cameras being recorded?
Not really. People didn't have cameras back then. It's not like today.
And what's the name? What was the name of that event?
Oh, I have the announcement from the Village Voice.
Oh,
it was called Zulu Nation Throwdown.
Oh
Zulu
my God, I
Nation
would love
Throwdown.
to have that so I could throw it in here to show people.
I'll email it to you. I'll email it to.
Wow.
I have a PDF of it. And so all the elements are there. Now, like I said, in the Bronx, you had hip hop artists performing years before that, but they never let breakdancers in those clubs. They never let graffiti artists in those clubs do their thing. It was all, that's the importance, what I was suggesting before, the importance of the downtown scene.
So do you feel that hip hop is 50 years or you think it's not 50 years?
As somebody who came to New York in 1978, I do not feel qualified to say.
Okay.
If somebody like my boy DXT, Grand Mixer DXT says it's 50 years, then I agree with that. I have no if Grandmaster Kaz says it's 50 years, then I agree with that. If Kool Herc says it's 50 years, then I agree with that. Because who am I to say that it's not? I wasn't in New York at that time. But
true. I know we're moving. I know we've been on here for a while, but I want to move on so that way we can end it with a really special way. I have a question. In the current state of hip hop culture, what is something you would like to change compared to what you witnessed all your life till 2023 now? What's something you would like to change now?
What's something I'm working on changing? And that is when hip hop was introduced to the world through the downtown scene, it was a multifaceted culture with dance, writing, spinning rhymes, and turntablism and fashion. And I want hip hop to mean all those things again, not just rap music, which is what it is now. It's like, oh, hip hop, that means rap music. No, hip hop is a multifaceted movement. I want to see all the elements come back together again, the way they were on my TV show, Graffiti Rock, the way they were for all the events that we threw downtown, the way they were for the tours that went to London and Paris and Tokyo. It was a multifaceted movement with all kinds of people involved, all kinds of colors and backgrounds. That's what I want to see hip hop be.
Nice. And I know you've contributed a lot, but what is something you can contribute now to the culture to make it better?
Well, people know that I was that cat that in 1983 predicted that breaking would become an Olympic sport and wrote about it in my book, Breaking, and actually even wrote the rules and regulations for it in my book. If you bother to see that book, the book's coming back out again, by the way.
Oh, I would love to. I collect all hip hop books, so I need to get that. Whether it's hardcover, whatever it is. I
wrote this proclamation with my New York City Breakers, the original New York City Breakers. And we said that this is an Olympic sport. And so because I was prescient and was seen in the future, that's what that means. There are people today at the IOC and the Olympics and different organizations that know that I did that and that I had that vision and are bringing me in to that world for next year in Paris when breaking becomes an Olympic sport.
Which that is the question. What is your opinion on breaking going to the Olympics? Which
Well,
is very important.
Well, I saw it as an Olympic sport in 1983. So of course my vision is coming true. So what else could I feel but like excited and happy? Now,
what's your opinion
concerned.
in the sense like, okay, go ahead.
I'm concerned about how it's handled. We all know that it made its way into the Olympics vis-a-vis Ballroom Dancing Federation, which is a very strange and oblique way to get in, but it was the only way that it was going to happen. So I'm grateful that the ballroom community and the people behind that decided to make that move. I'm grateful for it. But however, at the same time, I'm very concerned that like a lot of people in the game are concerned that when breaking is a sport in the Olympics, that as much of the history and as much of the culture of the dance is kept in, that it's not just my big concern and my big worry coming from the early 80s not as a breaker. I was never a breaker, but I was a freestyle dancer in the 60s and 70s. And I was certainly a B-boy choreographer. And I have a lot, which I'd love to share on the show, a lot to say about, and I have I play an important role in breaking when it comes to choreography. I am concerned when I see a lot of breaking today in things like Red Bull and whatnot, that looks to me like just simply gymnastics, and it's not dance, and it's not being done to music. And I want to make sure in any way that I can be of an influence that breaking in the Olympics is a dance, and that it adheres to dance and beats and music and rhythm. And somebody who's just doing like a wild routine that may be impressive on a gymnastics level, pays no respect to the music. And if I were a judge, I'm sure I won't be, but if I were a judge, you'd be losing points if what you did that might have been so incredible had no adherence to rhythm and beats and style. So there's that. But I would just like to quickly wrap up this whole thing, because I think it's important for your viewers to know my history, because that's why I'm here. Mm-hmm. We spent a lot of time talking about a lot of other things. So the Zulu Nation throwdown happens at the Ritz in September 14th, 1981. And thanks to Malcolm McLaren. Well, another new romantic person, Ruza Blue, who knows him, an English girl from London, who's all about the new romantic scene, dressed like Boy George, the whole 9 yards.
Oh yeah, I know Blue. I know her personally. So.
Blue, at that time was a girl from London, young teenager, had just come to New York, was part of the whole London scene here, of course, because those are her peeps. Knows somebody who was involved with the Clash, a guy named Cosmo Vinyl. He had a night at a Jamaican club called Negril in the East Village, and which makes sense because by the early 80s, the Clash and that whole movement and even the Sex Pistols and all that, they had a real connection with Jamaica. They had a real affinity and connection with the Jamaicans who moved to England over the last 50 years, and a real affinity for Jamaica. And so he had this night. From my understanding, he's busy with the Clash. He really can't run one night at this club. So he lets her take it. So she's doing events. I don't know what kind of events she was doing. Certainly weren't hip hop events, but they were some kind of events. They were maybe perhaps new romantic events. And she's at that night at the Ritz. She introduces herself to me and says, "Would you bring your review to my club on Thursday nights?" And I'm like, yes, another victory at the hands of another British expat, funny enough. Now I'm able to take all the elements of hip hop, and we now have a home. Every Thursday night, at this club called The Grill. And it's, Ruse the Blues night at The Grill, but it's my hip hop event.
Yep.
And so I'm putting the flyers together, just handmade flyers, like the way we were doing at the Mug Club, kind of raw, funky flyers. I rented about 5 different TV monitors and stacked them up and had Graffiti Rock. I mean, not Graffiti Rock, Catch a Beat, my early hip hop film, playing on these monitors. Ramel Z, who's a good friend at this stage, I had him do all these 3-dimensional armed arrow letters lining the walls of this downstairs downtown club. I was already managing Rocksteady Crew, so they were going to perform. By the way, when Rocksteady Crew performed at the Ritz a couple of months earlier in September, that was the first time they ever met Zulu Nation or met Bambaataa, was when they performed together that night on September 14th, 1981. That was the first time they ever met Bambaataa or Jazzy J or Red Alert or anybody else. Frosty Fleas took me say that fast 100 times. Frosty Freeze took me aside once. I think it was in Cleveland when during the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Frosty took me aside. He said, man, I want to thank you, man, because a lot of people don't give you credit for it, but it was you who introduced us to Bambaataa and to the Zulu Nation.
Wow.
We didn't know them before that show.
I never knew that. And you're the
I didn't
connection.
remember it.
You bridged the gap from Rocksteady and Zulu Nation, and the rest is history.
Well, to what degree, how much I bridged, I don't know, but I definitely introduced those two. So now, through the largesse of Ruza Blue, I'm very grateful for, she gives me a place where what I had been doing for years before, and even Fat Five Freddy before me, having performances at the Mug Club, having performances at the Rock Lounge, having performances at like I said, at Palladium and different places like that. They were one-offs, they were one-offs. Now we had a home every Thursday. And by 81, around November, it took a couple of months to get organized, but by November, we have the first Negril parties in the winter. And there's a debate. I've heard there's a debate not directly between us. Ruza Blue said, no, it wasn't even around in 81. Well, it must have been the winter or January of 82, because I certainly didn't bring my hip hop review from the Ritz to the Grill a year later. It was only a couple of months later. So it was maybe in November, December, or January of 82, or November, December of 81. So now we've gotten the Grill going. And at this stage, I don't know how I met Phase 2, but Phase 2 and I are already friends, and we're hanging out. And now we've got Negril going. And what Negril consisted of was the whole crowd that showed up was all my downtown buddies and all the downtown artists and kids, mostly white kids, right? Because it's a downtown scene, the art scene. And the performance was Bambaataa and Jazzy J turntables, Ike C on the mic, and different other MCs. Like I said, Ramel Z was doing graffiti or finished pieces on the wall, and Rocksteady Crew dancing. And this went on for a number of Thursdays. And I eventually went to, and I heard Legs tell the same story on Drink
Champs,
but he got it a little twisted around. He made it sound like it was his idea. It was my idea. Rocksteady Crew was performing every Thursday. And I said to Legs, I said, Legs, listen, man, I don't want you guys just to perform for an audience. I want there to be a battle. And I don't want it to be a battle, but an inter-crew battle. I want it to be like a battle with another crew. Can you bring another crew down? And of course, right at first, Legs doesn't want to do that, because then he's got to share the spotlight with another crew. Legs doesn't want to do that. But eventually he relented and said, okay, It turned out, unbeknownst to me, that Rocksteady had been at a battle, I think at Kennedy High School, with the Floor Masters. And either the Ball Busters or somebody else would beef with either Legs or Rocksteady or somebody when they're supposed to have a battle between Floor Masters and Rocksteady at Kennedy High School at some dance party at night, right, as we do in high school. Instead of them battling each other, very quickly, because of some beef with nothing to do with the dance, all of a sudden, the Floor Masters and Rocksteady crew have to join forces to fight their way out of the gym and run for their lives. What was going to be a battle ended up being a fight for their lives to get out. So, of course, if you go through something like that, you're going to become friends. I mean, we fought our way out of this, and instead of us battling and say, well, who won and you lost and blah, blah, instead of it being that kind of antagonism, it ended up being a friendly thing. And Leg said, okay, I know who to bring down to battle us at Negril. Well, he brings the Floor Masters down, and I'm like watching the Floor Masters dance, and Phase 2 is there as well. And I'm like, wow. I realized right away, I'm getting this incredible education. I'm realizing Rocksteady crew are finesse dancers. They're style dancers. This other crew that I'm seeing, these Floor Masters, they're athletic dancers. They're power dancers. They're power moves. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I apologize to Rocksteady crew for any disrespect, but my mind was made up as soon as I saw the Floor Masters. I was like, I want to see that. I want to see these power moves. The finesse moves are only taking me so far. I want to see, and the tricks and all that, they're great, but the power moves are pure athleticism. And I was like, who are you guys? And I was never Rocksteady's manager. I was just basically an agent for them, getting them gigs. So it wasn't really that big of a diss, but I kind of, dropped them in my importance, and was like thinking, wait a second. I want to get down with this. And Phase 2 and I, who's like an incredible dancer, were talking about this. And we were saying, what if we had an all-star team? Because I knew enough to see all these breakdance crews. They were neighborhood crews. They were buddies from the block. And there'd be some good, and there'd be some who were not so good, and some who did this move, and some who did that move. And everyone protected each other. I was like, nah, fuck that. I'm destroying that. I'm going to create a crew in which I am going to raid the best dancers from the best crews from anywhere in the city and put them in the New York City Breakers and make them an all-star crew. And part of that thinking was not only talking to FaZe, but to Little Lep, because he and I were boys at this time before I met Floor Masters. And I don't know how I met everybody. I can't remember the timeline, but this was all going on in the grill. And so I'm talking to Chino, who I can recognize right away as the leader. Even though I know years later, Kid Nice, Manuel was one who put the crew together. Chino was the leader, really. I mean, he was the charismatic one. He was the brains behind the thing. And I pulled him aside and said, I have this idea. We have this idea, me and FaZe. We want to put together like an all-star team. And I want the core of that all-star team to be the Floor Masters, to be these power breakers. And he was like, okay, it sounds interesting. And so a lot happened. But to cut to the chase, to make a long story short, met with them. Now it's 82. Now we're into the winter of 82. And I'm going up to Kingsbridge and meeting them, meeting their mothers. None of them had fathers in their lives. That was the life in the ghetto, right? Meeting their mothers, introducing myself, saying, I've got a real serious idea. I want to put together a crew that's not like any crew that ever existed. a neighborhood crew. Nah, this is a citywide crew. I already know I'm going to have Little Lep down. I know I want to have like Chino and the Power. And there were cats in Floor Masters that didn't come up to snuff for me. And I told Chino, they are not going to be down. I had to fight. I had to like negotiate. And I said, I want it to be an all-star team. I want it to be, and then we brought in, Little Lep brought in Flip Rock from around Lincoln Center area, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
San Juan Hill. Eventually we would bring in, Corey, Icy Ice from Queens. But we started out humble. It was basically just elements of Rocksteady because actually, or Seven Deadly Sins because Little Lep was both in Seven Deadly Sins and Rocksteady crew. Rated him, got the best of Floor Masters, and our first gig, which was found for us by Phase 2. I don't know how he met somebody who was a producer on the Merv Griffith show. And this was a time when these talk shows would travel to another city and spend a week there doing like the Merv Griffith show in New York or in Chicago for 1 week. They were in New York and they were looking for things that were very New York. And so we got an opportunity to audition for the Merv Griffith show. It was our first show. First thing that New York City Breakers ever did was national television. And here's what I said to when we finally got the crew together, the core five, the beginning five, I said to them, I'm going to ask you to sign a contract at some point, but I'm not going to ask you to do it now. I'm going to prove myself to you, and then we'll see if you want to sign a contract. So we did the Merv Griffith show. We did, what's his name from Officer and a Gentleman, and from the actor Richard Gere.
Oh, okay.
I got us a gig to do Richard Gere's wedding with the New York City Breakers, getting paid nice bank as well.
At that time was probably really good.
Like everybody gets $500 each, $1,000 each. And at a certain point, it was like, okay, you've just done national television, your first gig. You just done Richard Gere's wedding. I'm getting gigs all over the place. You got to sign the contract. And everyone's like happy to sign. But what's interesting, you have to keep in mind, this is what I really want to share with you and your audience. This is a B-boy show, a B-boy, B-girl show, right? A dance show. And remember, I was always a good freestyle dancer through high school, dropped out a year in college to join the Tubes and be a professional dancer, choreographed by no one less than Kenny Ortega. I have a real dance background. I was a professional dancer for a year, even though it wasn't something I studied to be. So now, a couple of years later, I'm in New York. I'm involved in hip hop. I'm putting together this crew, the New York City Breakers. I've already seen what Rocksteady crew does in performance. I saw them in the first time breaking ever was on film, was Flashdance. Cats hanging around in a soft kind of not so perfectly designed cipher, going down, doing a move. Somebody else comes down, does a move. Someone else comes down, does a move. I'm seeing all these things happen at Negril. Rocksteady, my crew, they're performing at Negril. Same thing. Someone's on the mic shouting out. That was actually Fat by Freddy shouting out different people doing moves. Oh, check out Frosty Freeze doing his suicide. Oh, check out Crazy Legs. Legs is doing his thing, doing great freezes. He was always an amazing dancer, amazing freeze, amazing moves. Really the best dancer of Rocksteady at that time. Ken Swift, everybody's going down. This is what I'm seeing over and over and over again. And I have a professional dance background. And I'm going like, this isn't cutting it for me. It's not cutting it for me. Not for my crew. Not for a crew that I'm creating, that I'm designing, that I'm directing. So I started saying, listen, we're doing this show on that. We hadn't even gotten the show yet on Merv Griffin. We're about to do the show. And I said, listen, I have a professional dance background. When we get up on national television, we are not going to stand around and have one guy go in and do a move and kind of sloppily get up and come back, and another guy goes in. That's not how it's going to work. We won't get the gig if we do that. These are LA people. They expect show business.
Routines, all acrobatics, all that crazy stuff.
Exactly. Now, of course, keep in mind, there have been all kinds of routines. Rocksteady has all these amazing routines that I witnessed them doing at the grill and everything else, 2-man routines, et cetera, et cetera. But what I was pushing for, and this is where I got in a lot of trouble with people years later in hip hop and in breaking, was this me pushing this professionalism into the game. When we did this thing, I said, we have to make this, and I choreographed, but I worked with everybody else too, because I didn't know the breaking moves exactly, but I knew choreography. And I said, when we do this, yes, you're going to go in one at a time, but there has to be a magical, professional, dynamic routine, whole crew routine in which people are allowed to come in and do their pieces solo while the whole crew is doing something.
Mm-hmm.
So we created a routine under my choreography in which there was a cipher in front of the camera. Everybody's down on one knee. And as one person goes in, everyone else around the cipher is spinning, just spinning on, on footwork spins to a new position as the next person goes into the cipher. Now they finish their move, they spin out, and everyone else spins out and with them as a new person replaces them. And it becomes this round robin of spins. That wasn't all. The other thing that I saw in breaking was some people do amazing freezes. Some people kind of flop and get up. And I was like, no. If you're a New York City breaker, anytime you dance, you will always finish your routine with a killer freeze. And not only will your freeze be killer, you will come up from that freeze in the most professional, beautiful, rhythmic way and get back to your position. There will be no standing around and kind of, humming and hawing and waiting for. No, everything is like clockwork. So I didn't invent freezes, of course. But what I stressed in my crew is that you'll never do a move or a routine without a freeze at the end. What I stressed to them was, when you perform in front of an audience, whether they know b-boying or not, when you end, you could do the most incredible windmills or the most incredible swipes or the most incredible headspin or whatever it is, and then you kind of just go into a sloppy kind of finish and get up. It's the last thing they see that they remember. It's the last thing the audience sees that they remember. Remember that. That's the thing I would drill into them. So always make, no matter how dynamic, no matter how fabulous your routine is, always end with a killer freeze, which was something I never had to say to Pex. I mean, because Powerful Pexter was always about the sickest freeze at the end. He never got up sloppy, ever. And so that was something I always pushed. Then that evolved. When we did that show at the Kennedy Center honors to honor Catherine Dunham while we were making Beat Street, that was a full crew routine that involved not only the New York City Breakers, but parts of Rocksteady. Wasn't so much Rocksteady because it kind of was, but it wasn't. It was Mr. Wiggles and Fable.
That was a magnificent.
So it was more the Magnificent Force than Rocksteady.
Yeah. Dynamic Dolls, right?
And I was going to say the Dynamic Dolls and some other dancers like Cool Keith, who was really a rapper, was a dancer during that. Cool Keith.
Yeah,
he was a dancer when anyway. He was doing a bit of locking and popping in that routine. So there's New York City Breakers, the Fable and Wiggles,
Magnificent
Force, Dynamic Dolls. So Dynamic was in it vis-a-vis the Dynamic Dolls and a handful of other dancers. 3 crews. We all worked together. I choreographed that show, but I will give Kim from the Dynamic Dolls credit for choreographing the part that the Dynamic Dolls do within my overall choreography. But we did something similar that we did the first time with Merv Griffin. We had a giant routine, a giant circle. And all you have to do is go on YouTube.
I had Kim 2 episodes prior.
I heard, I heard.
Yeah, she's on it too, and I gave the honors on the Kennedy Center, and I put some of the clip, and I'll put some on here too as well.
Yeah,
but I didn't even know you were part of it in the sense of choreography, which is awesome.
I choreographed that entire performance. And you know, with the ending with Matthew Caban with Fist Glide Master, like spinning, and
yes.
And they're all dancing. Dynamic Dolls in the back left, they're doing a routine. The Magnificent Force is doing a routine. The New York City Breakers are all doing windmills, while Glide Master is doing a fist glide, and they're all doing windmills into freezes one at a time on the spots of a clock dial. But freeze, spin, and then into a freeze with his back to the audience, looking over his shoulder to the music. And when now I think about, I never thought about it really as a choreographer or whatever, but when I think about it and look back at it, and I look now at these crew battles, like the way the Japanese kids have these full crew battles.
Oh yeah, they're on another level.
I have to say this, and there's going to be people who are going to argue it, but I introduced to b-boying full crew routines that tell a narrative, that have show business, that have a beginning, middle, and end, that tell a story. I did that. I invented that with the New York City Breakers. And you know, like I said, there'll be people who will argue that. Okay, but when I see what's going on with, especially in Japan, you know, with those crews that do those amazing routines, way beyond anything we ever did.
Yeah.
But it has to come from somewhere.
Yep.
And I just can't not believe that they didn't see our early routines and weren't inspired. They didn't come up with it in Japan.
Well, you planted the seed, and now you can see the fruits of all these crews all over the world. So you have a bunch of babies in the world that have created these crazy routines. If you started it, you planted it, it's out there, and you can actually see. So you should be proud of that, because you're like, man, this is what I created, and it's all over.
I'm proud of it, but you know, the reason why I'm not too vocal about it is because I just know the hate is coming. Like, how dare he say this? How dare he? Wasn't even a breaker. I wasn't a breaker, but I was a choreographer.
But how many choreographers in the world choreograph music videos that are not even breakers, and they're choreographing breakers?
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter.
But here's the thing. I also want to go back to the Grill, and you know what happened at the Ritz and the Grill, and starting New York City Breakers and all this stuff. You have to understand that New York City is the media capital of the world, which means that Canal Plus France, Paris, NHK Tokyo, BBC London, ZDF Germany, REI Italy, all these broadcasting companies around the world have documentary teams in major cities in the world, because when news pops off, they have someone there to shoot it. And then they send the tape, or nowadays they can just email it, and they get it on the air in minutes. Of course, you had to FedEx videotapes back in the 80s. But the point is that New York was a media capital, and anything that happened in New York that was at all newsworthy would be captured by these international documentary teams. And so anything that was going on in downtown New York, especially since punk rock had blown up and new wave and art world was blowing up. Anything that was going on downtown was just captured by these media companies because they were all downtown anyway. They would never in a million years know to go to the Bronx, leastwise go to the Bronx. They wouldn't even have the balls to go to the Bronx, but they wouldn't even know to go there. So when these hip hop events were happening at the Grill, the very first hip hop, truly all element hip hop club in the world, when they were happening downtown, the production teams and documentary teams from the BBC and NHK Tokyo and Canal Plus, they would come and film what was going on. And then they would send the tape back to London or to Paris or Tokyo and say, yo, check out what's going on in New York. These kids are spinning on their heads and these DJs are scratching records and people are making art with spray can, blah, 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 right? To the extent that, and I give Ruza Blue real credit for this, through me bringing hip hop to her, she was able to, smart enough and ambitious enough to put together a tour of these different artists. I wasn't involved in that. I wasn't included, but that's okay. To go to London and because of these documentary teams, it was already showing on TV in these different cities. So the cities were ready for a performance. So they were able to put together a tour that went to London, I think through Ruza Blue. And then one went to Paris. I don't know if she was involved, but somebody else might have been involved. Another one went to Tokyo. So hip hop had spread to these major cities around the world before it went to Pittsburgh, before it was ever heard of in Miami or
That's
LA.
crazy.
It was overseas before anyone in LA knew about it. And why? Because New York City is a media capital of the world, because people like me and Freddy and Charlie and Martha and Henry were were downtown New Yorkers, and because we brought this downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Not because of what was going on at the Sugar Hill Records.
Yes, correct.
Which happened before us. It was bringing it downtown.
So you were the passport.
We were
the
the
world.
passport to the world. Now, Sugar Hill and all that might have been the passport to the record companies. But in terms but I honestly believe this, and I'm not being arrogant, I'm not being mean-spirited at all. I honestly believe that if it hadn't been for the downtown scene and all of the culture coming downtown to the Ritz, to the Grill, getting filmed by international teams, blah, 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 to the art galleries, et cetera, et cetera. If it hadn't come downtown and been written about in the Village Voice, in the East Village Eye, like the first article that used the term hip hop and defined it was my interview of Bambaataa in the East Village Eye in 82, January 82. If it hadn't been for the uptown hip hop world rubbing shoulders with the downtown art world and us, the downtown kids, embracing them and having them perform at our clubs, if it hadn't been for that phenomenon, and if it had only been Sylvia Robinson, who I respect so much, putting out Sugar Hill Records, rap records, if it had only been that, I believe that rap music would have come and gone. I think that it would have had a popularity, that it would not have lasted. The reason why rap music has lasted is because it was placed inside the beautiful gem, diamond, multifaceted diamond of hip hop with multifacets, with dance, with art, with turntablism, with fashion, with language. It was made into this diamond, multifaceted, multifaceted diamond that we, the downtown kids, really forged, that was able to be put on display for the rest of the world, that gave rap its audience. The breaker, let me tell you, I've been involved in a lot of early hip hop shows around the country and around the world in the early 80s. And everyone who came to those shows, they heard the rap, they heard the turntablism, they came for the breaking. They came for the break. They wanted to see people spin on their heads. People rapping to a beat was not that unusual. Turntablism was, but it was harder to understand. Graffiti was understood, was known. But somebody doing windmills and spitting on their heads, the world wanted to see that. It was breaking that opened the doors to hip hop culture around the world. And all these rappers who came along in the late 80s and early 90s who were like, oh man, that break dancers, man, this is silly. Who wants to know about that? All those producers, all those labels that denigrated the dance and thought it was meaningless and said, just focus on vinyl, just focus on the records, forget those dancers, forget those graffiti artists, even forget the DJs who were the kings of the scene. Just worry about the rappers. They owe such a debt to the B-boys. They don't even know. They have no idea, because I was the outsider looking in, educated, coming from a corporate world, having performed around the world as a professional dancer, knew the world, lived all over the world.
Look at
I was
that.
the outsider who had clarity, who could see, and I saw clearly how hip hop culture spread around the world and the elements that made it so important to audiences around the world. The first thing that they always wanted to know was, what I wanted to know back in 1981 was, where's this guy who spins on his head? Breaking was the lost leader of hip hop.
Wow, that is amazing. That is amazing. And I know we're coming up to 4 hours, but it's all good because it's difficult to cover 40 plus years in just 4 hours. And not even in 24 hours you could do that, because there's so many stories, so many places you've been, things you've done in your life. So it's very, very difficult.
We didn't even
But I
talk
wanna
about Graffiti Rock.
Yeah, look
My
at that.
first
We haven't
hip-hop
even
TV
talked.
show.
Look
What the
at
hell?
like look at that so much, and catch the beat right there. Like that's a little clip of it, right?
There it is. First hip-hop film, 1981.
1981, first hip hop
Jazzy
film.
J, right there, Rocksteady Crew.
That is amazing, man. It's so beautiful. Just the fact. Look
IBM,
at IBM.
Dynamic Rockers.
Oh my God! Now it makes sense. I never understood what IBM was when I used to see that, and now you cleared it up.
That's Frosty
Look at-
Freeze right there.
Yes. Look at that right there. Let's pause that right there.
I'll take it.
Yes. But we're gonna move on because I have a few more questions. So, if you could go back to being a kid again, what would you tell yourself? Remember that 10-year-old kid that I mentioned earlier, little Michael. What would you tell that kid if you know? Let's say you could take a time machine and you know what you know now,
Right.
and Michael knows that it's Michael in the future came to visit him. What would you tell that little kid?
I'd say save all your money and buy all the Basquiat paintings that you can while you can. That's
I know.
a joke.
Yeah, I seen $110 million a painting.
Yeah. Well,
I
one of his
couldn't believe-
paintings sold for that.
Wow.
Not all of them
amazing.
sell for that.
But what
only
else?
one.
What else you would tell that
No,
kid?
no, I mean that's a bit of a being facetious, but what I would say on a more spiritual level, on a more heart-to-heart level, what I would tell my 10-year-old self, and this is very emotional. I mean, almost feeling like getting, my getting misty here. But if I could reach out to my younger self, I would stress that I would want you to believe in yourself and to know that you know what's right and what's good and what's fly and what's cool. And I want you to when you have an idea and you want to do something, go with it. Don't let anybody dissuade you. Don't let anyone say that idea doesn't work or that's a stupid idea. Believe in yourself. Push boundaries. Get to know people. Reach out to people. Be inspired. Just allow the world to inspire you and allow yourself to inspire the world. But the number one thing was set fear aside. Don't be afraid. Don't let fear stop you from your dreams. And when you dream something, believe in it, embrace it. Know that you can make it happen. That's what I would tell myself as a 10-year-old.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful to say, because you got kids that watch this, and if they look up to you and they see, wow, man, I would love to be, a filmmaker, a director, choreographer, all the stuff you've done. These kids could be like, wow, I can actually do that, because
Sure.
these kids now, they don't believe they could do none of this.
But you know something, I didn't really, there was nobody to tell me I could or couldn't. I just did it. I just did it. I have to tell you though, too, in your youth, in your teenage years, in your 20s, is a really important time to really find your voice and say what you have to say and do what you have to do. Make your art, do your thing. In your teens and 20s, it's important that you get it down then. Don't wait too long. But you can do it at any time. But sometimes as you get older, you fear starts to come into the picture, and you have all these obligations, and you don't want to do this, you don't want to do that, you don't feel like you have the strength. Or it's when you're young and you don't know that you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. That's the best time to do it. When you're young, you don't
Absolutely.
know what it takes to write a screenplay or what it takes to make a film, and you don't know that you can't do it. That's the time to do it, because you don't know that you can't do it. So go ahead and do it. Don't be afraid. Make
Beautiful,
it
beautifully
happen.
said. Now, if you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
Wow. Well, you can tell I'm into being a lot and doing a lot of things.
Yes. But
Um,
if you could put it down to, what, I'll give you more than one thing, because I know for you to do
no,
one
it's
thing, that's
better to
gonna.
say one thing. It's better though.
Okay.
I
One
think
thing.
I
What would
think
it
it's
be? What would it be?
stick to your first idea. See,
Okay, there you go.
I'd like to be remembered. And this is so weird because when I got involved in hip hop, I remember, for example, when I got heavily involved in breaking and everything, I remember Jean-Michel Basquiat, right, my bandmate, going, Michael, breakdancers, really? Because he's expecting me to be this avant-garde, not artist, not being some uptown impresario breakers and
Yeah, like
hanging out with these
contemporary
like
artist.
teenage kids and stuff, breakdance. He was like, breakdancing, really? Like that was a bad thing, right? And I remembered, like, oh, this is Basquiat saying this. I mean, maybe I'm making a mistake. No, I don't care. I'm just going to stick with it. And over the years, because I am a fine artist, you see some of my paintings behind me.
Yes.
I make film. I do all kinds of things. Sometimes I wondered if I had done the right thing or not, as I wasn't a hip hop producer, impresario, not as an artist, not as a dancer, but as a producer, putting on shows, making films, doing this and doing that. Did I make a mistake in my life? Should I have focused on the more of the avant-garde downtown world that I'd come up in? Should I have focused on making films and not spending so much time and so much energy building up the careers of other people, like my dancers and like other beat and other hip hop artists who I had put on my show and whatever, making shows and doing things for other artists? Did I make a mistake? Should I have been more selfish and just focused on me and my arts and my films, for example? And now that I'm 68 and I'm seeing breaking coming to the Olympics, and I'm seeing how so many hip hop artists around the world are changing their worlds, how rappers in Myanmar and in Thailand are standing up to the juntas and standing up to the royal family, how graffiti artists are standing up to the police in different places in the world, how so many artists around the world are using hip hop as a voice of resistance and revolution and change. And I think I had a part of that. I had maybe not a big part, but I played a part in spreading this culture around the world to where these kids had a voice. So I guess I'd like to be remembered as an impresario, as an artist, as a soul who cared enough to push this culture, to awaken the voices of poor and working class kids worldwide, just like their counterparts who created hip hop in the Bronx, poor and working class kids. For the first time in history, poor and working class kids were given a voice, an international voice that never happened before hip hop. Poor and working class kids did not have a voice. Now they do, as breakers, as DJs, as rappers, as MCs, as designers, as journalists. They're coming from the streets and they're making bank and they're making names for themselves. They're not only doing that, but through their voices, they're impacting the politics of the worlds that they are in. They're changing elections through rap songs. There was a politician in Kenya years ago who got elected because of a rap song. I would love to be remembered as one of the people who found a way to give poor and working class kids around the world power and a voice through hip hop culture.
I love it. Love it. That's so amazing. And we're at the end of the show, and that was beautifully said what you just said. So I'm going to give you your own screen, and I want you to tell the whole world, what are you up to these days? Where can people find you online and connect with you? And then we're going to finish it off. So take it away, my brother.
Well, what I'm up to these days? Well, actually, I'm working on a couple of projects that I can't mention right now because they are not ready to be announced, but they will be in the next couple of months. Watch out for some international press releases from myself and from one of my partners, Arthur Baker, producer Arthur Baker, produced Planet Rock. We have a couple of projects up our sleeves that you will be blown away when you find out what we're doing. I'm re-releasing my breaking book. I'm going to be doing all kinds of exciting things with all kinds of artists over the next year or couple of years, because next year is the 30th anniversary of Graffiti Rock. Oh, sorry, what am I saying? Next year is the 40th anniversary of Graffiti Rock. Next year is the first year that breaking will be an Olympic sport. I'm going to be involved in so many different things. Just you can follow me, Michael Holman 101 at Instagram. I'm on Facebook. Just watch out. Watch the international media. You'll be hearing from me very soon about some very exciting projects.
Any shout outs? Any shout outs?
Yo, shout out to all my boys and girls in the game. There's so many people, I can't even begin to shout them out, because if I shout somebody else is going to be left out. So I'm not even going to do a shout out. I'm just going to say a shout out to all my family and friends who they know who they are, who I love, and everybody out there who I may not know, but we know each other through heart and soul. We want to make the world a better place. Shout out to all of you. Stand up, do the right thing, make this world a better place. This is the only one we have.
And that's the reason why I created this platform, to give brothers like yourself to speak up, let everyone know how you started, the beautiful things you've accomplished. It was just beautiful, the words that you just said, just giving the voice to, you know, brothers that were part of the projects or the BX or just the Boogie Down Bronx, when buildings were burning. You know, they didn't have parents, like the dad wasn't around, and you just gave them the opportunity of saying that you believed in them. And I really appreciate that, because everyone needs someone to believe in them, just to give them that little push, because especially when you don't have a dad around, it's a difficult situation. You know, the streets becomes your dad, or the neighborhood drug dealer. So I really appreciate what you've done. And I believe when you said something you'll be remembered for, I believe you will be remembered for just giving the voice and just putting New York City Breakers on the map. And I am so honored, and thank you very much for being part of the show. Like I said, I wanted to give you my flowers now. I've heard your name forever. Never met you face to face, but man, I feel like I knew you for a long time now. So I really appreciate you doing this show, taking your time from your busy schedule to spend a few hours with me. And well, not with me only, but everyone that's listening. But thank you very much, Michael. It was an honor. It was so much information, so much history, and I am so inspired. And all I can say is thank you, brother. Thank you,
Thank you, Flash. I appreciate this time.
And how you like the show, man? It was good. It was pretty
good.
Right?
It was really, it was great. A lot of fun.
Awesome. And my goal is to, hence my name, Flashback, is to give you a flashback.
Right,
so that's what I was trying to do, man. But ladies and gentlemen, that is Michael Holman right there, a true legend, living legend, an icon. I go by the name of Flashback. This is Flash Talks, history worth listening to. Ladies and gentlemen, peace out, y'all.
Yeah.
Dad, that is so official.